Chapter 196. When Knight brought Sillin and the others over, the lab was busy, so there was basically no one at the staff dormitory. It was fine as long as they could avoid the surveillance cameras. As for the surveillance cameras, it wasn't difficult with Hui Mao and Cheto around. It was also because the lab was busy that Yu Lu and Feng Haichao were the only ones in the room. The others were collecting information at various places. Yu Lu and Feng Haichao thought that they were rescuers when they saw Knight bringing them in, but they quickly dismissed the thought. With their eyesight, there was no way they couldn't tell the difference between an experimental subject and an outsider. But after they heard Sillin's words, their wariness turned into surprise and doubt. They believed that Knight wouldn't do something so stupid as to dig up their secrets without permission. But who in the world was this person who saw through their secrets with a single glance? Yu Lu, who was playing with his gun on the bed, sat up. The gun that had disintegrated into parts in midair became whole again when it landed in his hand. Tang Qiuqiu's red eyes flashed when she saw Yu Lu's move. At first, Knight was thinking about how to introduce Sillin. After all, Sillin was dead back then. He didn't expect Sillin to expose himself. This was fine. Only when both sides knew each other's background would they be able to cooperate better. Although this operation to search for evidence was classified, it wouldn't be classified anymore after the incident was successfully concluded. The public would be able to guess some things from the media. After Knight's explanation, Yu Lu and Feng Haichao only sighed for a moment. They weren't too surprised by Sillin's resurrection. That's why Yu Lu said back then that someone like Sillin wouldn't die so easily. Feng Haichao smiled. Knight was conflicted. Why was he the only idiot who thought that Sillin was dead? No, wait, there was also Lung. Both of them had idiotic thinking. But it couldn't be helped. At the time, they had witnessed Sillin's assassination. He was shot through by a bullet in front of so many people and bled so much. Not even the instruments could detect any signs of life. It was hard not to believe it. Hearing their conversation, Tang Qiuqiu bit her finger. Are you guys talking about the time Sillin was shot at 7 Lights back then? Knight and the other two looked at Tang Qiuqiu at the same time with inquiring eyes. Tang Qiuqiu continued to bite her finger, but she didn't say anything. Sillin rubbed Tang Qiuqiu's head. She was the one who copied the gun. The mouths of Nat and the other two formed an O shape. Looking at the gun in Tang Qiuqiu's hand, Knight came to a realization. If she had such skills, it was no wonder Sillin gave her the gun. It seems like we have 2 sharpshooters here, Feng Haichao said. Tang Qiuqiu looked at Yu Lu. When she saw Yu Lu playing with a gun, she knew that his marksmanship was very good. It wasn't because of the way he played with the gun but because of the way he looked at the gun. It was obvious that Yu Lu was very interested in this young sharpshooter. If there's a chance, let's compete. Okay. During this time, Sillin discussed their next operation plan with them. With Cheto and Hui Mao's help and Knight's cooperation, things should be a lot easier. The reinforcements should be arriving soon, and the evidence we've gathered is almost there. When the time comes, we'll be able to send a message to the reinforcements, Knight said. As long as we follow this plan, everyone will be able to retreat in one piece. Feng Haichao nodded. While they were talking, another person entered the room. Sillin didn't know this person. Luther, you're back. Knight introduced Sillin and the others to Luther. He emphasized that Sillin and the others were trying to rescue their companions, and that Sillin and Knight were old acquaintances. Luther only nodded expressionlessly. Sillin wasn't angry at Luther's reaction. It was because Luther was shrouded in a dark aura right now, and it was obvious that he was in a bad mood. Considering his cautious personality, he didn't even ask about Sillin's background. What's wrong? Feng Haichao asked. Luther exhaled heavily. Don't count on the reinforcements. They won't make it in time, and it'll take them at least 40 to 50 hours to get here. 40 to 50 hours. A new batch of exotic beast puppets would have appeared by then. Then what the fuck is the point of fighting? Knight immediately swore when he heard Luther's words. Come to think of it, there were so many reinforcements. Even if they didn't let Miracle know what they were planning, with so many old foxes in Miracle's management, they would definitely create some trouble just in case and obstruct them. Plus, the voices in the army weren't unified, so after going around in circles, They might not be able to rush over even if they were all wiped out. Crouching on Silen's shoulder, Huemao's tail wagged intermittently. He didn't look worried, but he seemed to be thinking about something. Hearing that there was no reinforcements, he glanced at Silen and looked down again. How could Huemao's little movements escape Silen's eyes? After spending so much time together, he knew what kind of shit this cat was going to take as soon as it wagged its tail. Stroking Huemao's ears, Silen told it to use that method if there was no other way. Huemao couldn't hold back its excitement. It meowed and rubbed its face against Silen's face. Knight's face twitched. Motherfucker. What kind of situation is this? And you're still acting like a master and servant. When the members of the team returned, Tang Qiuqiu met the person who injected him. It was one of the members of the operation team, Ruolin. Thank you, big brother. I'll treat you to some candy when we get out. Ruolin pinched Tang Qiuqiu's face with a smile. Sure. Knowing that there would be no reinforcements, the operation became much more difficult. Schultz's experimental subjects are very strong. It's useless even if you shoot them in the heart, you can only hit their heads. Those puppets no longer have their own thoughts and only listen to their master. Knight explained the situation at the base to Silen. They could still tamper with the defense system a little, but those puppets were too difficult to deal with. Those people were originally A-rank genotypes, and they became even stronger after being modified. The guards in the base were basically these modified humans, and some of these modified humans would be sold at a high price after being modified. Whether it was assassination, bodyguard, or combat, these people were all very good choices. But it was different for Knight's group. After all, there were only 10 of them, and even with Silen's group, they weren't confident that they could escape. Without reinforcements, they would all die here unless they stopped the mission and hid here until reinforcements arrived. But if they did that, they would miss out on important evidence, and it would also give the people of Miracle time to whitewash it. It would be difficult to find an opportunity then. Time waited for no man. Seeing that they still hadn't come up with a good plan, Silen said, I have an idea, but it'll cause a lot of commotion when the time comes. What idea? Tell me first. Knight asked Silen. Silen took out a round ball about the size of an egg. There are thousands of parasite eggs inside. These are a type of parasite called brain devouring. They will feed on the host's brain during parasitism in order to satisfy their own growth needs. All 10 people's faces twitched without exception. Vanguard Division 6? You're that person. Ruolin exclaimed. Knight only said that Silen was a hunter of one of Vanguard's B squadrons. He didn't elaborate on the specifics, nor did he mention which B squadron he was from. But speaking of parasites, Ruolin recalled a piece of news he had heard before. Ruolin continued. Someone told me about eliminating Poison Fang and killing Skeleton King back then. Knight and the others looked at Silen in a flash. So it's you. The A Squadron of Vanguard had covered up the fact that they had eliminated Poison Fang back then, and did not reveal who it was. Not many people knew that it was the 6th Division who did it. But there were still some people who knew part of the truth. Skeleton King had died a terrible death. They had seen images of Skeleton King through certain channels, and it was no surprise that their blood ran cold. They also knew that the main cause of Skeleton King and Poison Fang's demise was parasites. They never knew that parasites could be as powerful as biological weapons or high-energy weapons. Now that they saw the egg in Silen's hand, all 10 people took a step back in unison. How are you going to guarantee that these parasites won't attack us? Knight swallowed and asked. Silen took out another box of pills and tossed it to Knight. These pills will keep these parasites away from you. Although Knight believed in Silen, the others were still skeptical. Ruolin, on the other hand, was more excited than the others. He hadn't been satisfied when he heard that person's story, but now he finally had the chance to experience it himself. Those who knew herbalism examined the pills Silen gave them, and proved that they would not harm the human body. Moreover, the effects of the pills were limited. After this time, the pills would break down in the body and be excreted as bodily fluids or metabolites. The duration is 50 hours. There aren't many people here, so there are 30 pills. Everyone should bring 2 pills just in case. We'll talk about it again if there's a special situation. Sillin took back the pills and said, "That's fine, but you must first prove that this pill is effective." Someone said, "Then let's find 2 people and try it." And so Luther knocked out a researcher, brought him back, gagged him and locked him inside a small bedroom. Knight was also inside the bedroom. This was Knight's own initiative. After he swallowed a pill, he crossed his arms and leaned against the wall of the bedroom. There were 3 insect eggs in the bedroom. After they hatched, 3 little fellows the size of ants crawled out. After a brief pause, they crawled straight towards the researcher. The insect egg beside Knight crawled away like a mouse that saw a cat after it hatched. It crawled straight towards the researcher on the other side of the bedroom. Knight in the bedroom, and the operation team members outside the bedroom heaved a sigh of relief. Then they stared closely at the unconscious researcher. 10 minutes later, the researcher began to twitch. The veins on his forehead bulged, and his breathing quickened. Half an hour later, the researcher's face turned green and bloodless. His breathing slowed down and his body spasmed. Knight touched his forehead. It was covered in cold sweat. Chapter 197. The parasitized researcher's face turned from red to white and then green. In the end, blood splattered everywhere as the parasites burst out of his skull. The splattered blood was not bright red, but black and viscous. It solidified not long after it splashed out. This blood is all contaminated. The toxins secreted by the parasites can flow to every part of the body through blood circulation. This is a side effect of the brain being devoured. Sillin explained the image of the parasites entering a human's body. Sillin's tone was calm, but the rest of the group felt chills running down their spines. They had faced alien beasts dozens of times larger than humans, fought through bullets and brushed shoulders with death many times before, but they couldn't help but shudder at the sight of these parasites. They couldn't help but feel like their brains were reacting to them. After taking care of the 3 multi-legged parasites, Knight sighed emotionally. Too fast. They're growing too fast. In just half an hour, these parasites had grown from the size of ants to the size of a palm. It had to be said that these guys' growth rate was astonishing. The reason they could grow so fast was because Sillin had thought about the parasites' genes. It was similar to the 2 parasites he had used to eliminate Poison Fang. They were all injected with lethal genes, and there was a critical point. When these parasites grew to a certain stage, these lethal genes would activate and cause them to undergo programmed death. However, these brain-devouring parasites could not reproduce. They did not exist naturally, but were born in the workshop Enji had left for Sillin. Sillin did not want a species invasion to happen in the future, so he did not give these parasites the ability to reproduce when he created them. Sometimes, Sillin thought that he was actually not much different from the researchers at the Miracle Research Base. They were cold-blooded enough. Back then, when he watched the Poison Fang people on the entire planet slowly die in fear, his calm mind allowed him to realize that he was capable of numbing himself. Selfishness was innate in humans. Treat yourself well, treat people you know well, and walk your own path. That was all. I admit that these parasites are a great threat, but that's only against the defenseless researchers. What would happen to the puppets? What would happen to the puppet beasts? Someone asked. It's simple. We just need to catch one and experiment on it, Luther said expressionlessly. There's not enough time, Knight said. There's no time for special experiments. Then let's make a few plans now and change them according to the situation while we're experimenting, Yulu said. Sillin agreed with Yulu. Right now he needed to save Shueqiu and Qifeng as soon as possible. Create chaos. Most of the puppets in this base are puppets, while the rest are researchers. As for the other guards, as long as the puppets are in chaos, the guards will naturally deal with the puppets first. There's no need for us to do anything. You'll be able to gather more information in the chaos, and I'll be able to rescue my friends. After thinking for a while, the 11 of them gathered together to discuss countermeasures. Tang Qiuqiu and Cheto stood at the side. Tang Qiuqiu's attention was originally on Sillin's group, and listening to their discussion on how to save Shueqiu and Qifeng. However, her gaze suddenly swept to Huimao. Right now, the cat was wearing a strange expression on its face. Crouching on Sillin's shoulder, Huimao thought about how to create chaos and eat some experimental alien beasts that hadn't been injected with the drug yet. Judging from the information they gathered, these beasts were of good quality and should taste good. Hiss, it's been a long time since I've eaten something like that. An hour later, while disguised as a technician, Roland and another team member carried the 2 parasite eggs Sillin had given him and headed towards the important research area. Although they had to go through multiple identity checks and scans, Cheto was accompanying them. Earlier, Cheto had hacked into the system to check the information of the researcher whose head had been blown off by the parasite. His iris, fingerprint, and genetic information were all there, so he didn't need to put on any makeup to disguise himself. After putting on his work uniform, he led the way not far away from Roland and the others. Be it the access control or the scanning system, Cheto and the others ignored them. The door opened automatically, and the scanning system didn't sound any alarm. Like before, Sillin and the others were still inside the staff dormitory and watching the situation on the monitor. Their movements were all displayed on the monitor, and they had even drawn out a detailed layout of the area at the same time. They didn't go deep into the area. Instead, they quietly planted 2 parasite eggs on the bodies of 2 puppets that were guarding the edge of the area. Then they stood guard at the corner. From the monitor Cheto had replicated beside the passageway, they could see the 2 parasite eggs hatching on the puppets' bodies. Then, the 2 parasites quickly burrowed into the puppets' bodies. Those parasites look very excited. The puppets are much more attractive to them than normal researchers, Sillin said while looking at the monitor. This was without a doubt good news. Although the puppets had lost their sense of pain, their control over their brains was much simpler. Moreover, they had been modified and strengthened. This kind of brain environment was exactly what the parasites liked the most. It didn't take long for the 2 puppets' facial muscles to start twitching, but their eyes hadn't changed at all. They were empty, numb, and emotionless. Moreover, they could no longer feel pain. 10 minutes later, the meridians on the puppets' faces started bulging, and they added an extra layer of savagery to the puppets. Moreover, the puppets' eyes were starting to turn red. A drop of dark red blood seeped out of the puppets' eyes and slid down their dissatisfied meridians. Then a second drop, a third drop. The puppets weren't as rigid as they used to be. Their arms were trembling, and their heads were shaking slightly as if they were struggling with some kind of mental struggle. Suddenly, one of the puppets threw a punch at the other puppet and sent it flying. However, the puppet crawled back to its feet after falling to the ground, and the dark red blood in its eyes flowed faster and faster. The blood that fell to the ground quickly solidified and gave off a pungent smell. Cheto was controlling the defense system so that it couldn't activate the alarm because of this. Sillin's eyes lit up when he saw the analysis data Cheto sent over. The blood of the infected puppets contains a volatile gas. If inhaled too much of it, it will cause a person to faint, foam at the mouth, lose consciousness, and even suffer severe brain contusion. Roland and the other team member had already put on a protective mask at Cheto's suggestion, but they were a little puzzled when they saw that Cheto wasn't wearing any protective measures at all. However, they didn't ask any more questions after giving it some thought. There were a lot of strange people in this world, and the one in front of them was probably one of them. What they didn't know was that Cheto wasn't a human, but a robot. Execute Plan B. As the operation team, Knight ordered everyone to split up and begin the operation. Meanwhile, Sillin, Tang Qiuqiu, and Hui Mao also began the next step of the operation. Inside the key laboratory, Schelt was smiling very happily as he watched Xueqiu and Qifeng locked inside the monitoring room. The electronic notebook in his hand was refreshing one line after another. Although the drugs hadn't arrived yet, the initial resistance tests showed that these 2 test subjects were excellent test subjects. They were much better than the 1,000 or so animal test subjects before them. The white animals' genes were very complicated. At the very least, Schelt had never seen such a genetic organism before. The complicated, multi-strand helix made this fellow who looked like a pet bear look very different from the other experimental beasts. As for the half-beastman who had both human and canine genes, Schelt was preparing a different kind of drug to stimulate both genes. He didn't know whether the human gene or the canine gene was the dominant factor. Other than that, he could also extract strengthening substances from these 2 test subjects. However, it would probably be difficult to use a knife on a human. It would seem that he would have to find a new batch of test subjects after the drugs were delivered. Just as Shelt was planning in his heart, an alarm suddenly rang. A source of contamination has appeared in the XR area. Initial inspection shows that it was brought in by modified test subjects. Shelt was thinking about the 2 new test subjects when he heard the AI system's report. He frowned a little, annoyed at the sudden interruption. As expected, modified test subjects were useless things that only spoiled things. Not only did they not strengthen their abilities by much, they even brought in a source of contamination. Without looking at the specific effects, Shelt said directly, "AI, or get rid of them." The laboratory in this area was controlled by a common AI system, and the only person controlling this AI system was Shelt. Shelt had always been conceited. He wouldn't think that someone had tampered with the puppets, nor would he believe that his AI system assistant would be blind. "All right." The AI system named AI replied. Her voice was soothing and gentle, and it calmed down a lot of people's agitation. At the same time, the 2 puppets who were fighting until black blood splattered everywhere were frozen into solid ice by an ultra-low temperature freezing gun that appeared on the wall. Then, a sonic gun shot through and turned the 2 bodies of ice into ice powder. However, the gas in the air didn't react at all. This was the result of Cheto's work. At this time, Knight and his team members were carrying some insect eggs as they snuck into the research base in the important area step by step. Knight placed a small ice cube at a corner. When the ice cube melted, the insect eggs inside would be exposed, and a large number of parasites would hatch soon after. Sillin told Hui Mao and Tang Qiuqiu to stay together while he went another way. He checked the time. Everyone should be ready already, so it was time to move on to the next step. Cheto begin. Cheto, who was approaching the core of the research base, received the message and looked at a monitor. Every monitor was a part of the AI system. Cheto would be able to interfere with the entire AI system by attacking a small part of it. The battlefield of electronic networks belonged to Cheto by nature. He might not be as powerful as Hui Mao, but he wasn't any weaker than the current Hui Mao when it came to electronic systems. Right now, Hui Mao was lacking in experience. Compared to him, the Cheto created by Sillin was much more cautious. Every step he took was precise to the extreme, and left no hidden dangers behind. The alarm inside the important research base rang again. The AI system's voice said, "Source of contamination discovered. Puppets out of control." Shelt stared at the light screen in front of him. The puppets guarding the passageways outside the lab were going berserk. They weren't under the AI system's control at all, and one of the experimenters walking outside had already been torn to pieces. While Shelt was talking to the AI system, everyone's gazes were focused on the light screen due to the commotion outside. While the experimenters were running into the lab, Cheto followed the people who were rushing into the lab. The newly hatched parasites were running towards the people around them. Shelt was angry because of the puppets' rampage outside the projection. "Just clean them up." "I'm sorry, the cleaning equipment has malfunctioned, and the power supply is insufficient," the AI system said. Shelt was a research maniac, but he was definitely not a good analyst. His intelligence was all in experiments, and his ability to analyze the situation was far inferior to his research ability. It was also a factor Knight and the others had considered when they came up with their plan. Insufficient supply? How can there be insufficient supply? Where are the energy blocks? Send someone to find them. How can the lab's power go out? "Boss, something's wrong with test subject number 107. A researcher said. "What's going on?" Shelt roared. The test subjects here were his blood, sweat, and tears. How could they be acting strangely without a good result? Right now, a lion-like beast locked inside the surveillance lab number 107 was scratching the walls around it madly. The walls were all reinforced, so it was not that easy to scratch through. However, this test subject thought that it could not scratch inside, so it started using its body to ram into the walls. Its 5-meter-tall body slammed into the reinforced walls, producing a series of dull thuds. The surrounding air vibrated along with it. "Boss, we can't go on like this. Do I need you to tell me that?" Shelt slapped the researcher who spoke. "Aren't you in charge of this test subject? How could something like this happen? I don't know either. The researcher shivered. Although he usually vented his anger on this test subject, it was always within the test subject's tolerance. Something like this had never happened before. Ow. According to the analysis, test subject number 107's nervous system is damaged. The air input from the local life support system contains a gas that can cause nerve damage. The AI system analyzed the measured data and reported. Slap. Another slap to the face. If he had a gun in his hand, Sheldon would definitely have shot this researcher dead. From his point of view, the error in the local health system's gas input was definitely a problem with the researcher. Restoring the air composition. Before Shelt could finish his sentence, Al reported the same thing that had happened in several other laboratories. Boss, did someone invade and cause trouble? A researcher behind Shelt asked in a low voice. Slap. Another slap. Shelt said angrily. If someone invaded, do you think Al is just a decoration? The other researchers all lowered their heads. As for what they were cursing in their hearts, they did not know. This had just been solved when the AI system indicated that there were several more abnormal conditions in the test subjects in the experimental rooms. Sillin had added something to the life support system of this experimental room, introducing the gas released from the blood of the puppets after they were infected. It was not just test subject number 107. Sillin had also added the same thing to the other experimental rooms. The problem with the test subject had not been solved yet. At this moment, a researcher screamed and squatted down while holding his head. His 10 fingers hugged his head tightly, as if he was going to stab his fingers into it. His veins protruded, and his eyes began to change. The white of his eyes was gradually replaced by black and red. This was just the beginning. Researchers with the same situation followed one after another. Now Shelt also knew that something was wrong. There's a source of pollution here? Who brought it in? I'll check the source. Check the source, unknown source found. The light screen that appeared showed the location of the research institute that carried the source. Get rid of it. Shelt said mercilessly. Boss, don't kill me. Shelt, you can't do this. We can still be saved. Ignoring the shouts of the experimenters, a transparent barrier enveloped the experimenters. With a flash of white light, they turned into dust. Analyze the type of source, Shelt ordered. Sorry, unable to analyze the type. How is this possible? Before Al could answer, the experimental rooms where the test subjects were locked opened one after another. The animals inside rushed out and bit anyone they saw. Al. Shelt roared while fleeing. Sorry, unable to control, Al's AI system said. Screams sounded again and again. But how could the researchers fight against the newly released test subjects? Cheto admitted that he had arrived at a control room when he was not paying attention. Screech following the sound, Cheto looked over. There was a person standing there. No, it was an image created by the system. It was a beautiful girl dressed in white, but she didn't look like a pure human. Her eyes were closed left and right instead of up and down. And there was a pair of snow-white wings on her back. She looked like a certain character from the myth of creation. Shelt said that I am the best AI system. The girl said while looking at Cheto. There was no joy or anger in her voice. It was more of a gentle, breezy voice. Cheto looked at the image for a moment before turning around and continuing to walk inside. He said while walking, but Sillin said that I am the AI system with the most potential. I think so too. Following Cheto's voice, the girl's image began to become intermittent and then extinguished. Cheto opened the lab door and let the test subjects out. A while later, he opened the room where Shueqiu and Qifeng were locked. Entering the lab, Sillin was about to bring the unconscious Shueqiu and Qifeng out when his communicator rang. It was night. What is it? Sillin asked. I have bad news. According to a source, one of Miracle's executives, Caldwell, had just given the order to destroy this base, and it will only cause accidents. Chapter 198. I have bad news. According to our sources, Caldwell, one of the executives of Miracle, had just ordered us to destroy this base and make it look like an accident. How much time do we have left? Sillin asked. I don't know, but it's best if we leave the base within 10 minutes. We'll meet up at the Miracle Goddess. All right. Sillin, be careful. Although the incident back then wasn't real, he still felt a sense of suffocation every time he thought back to it. I know. You guys be careful too. After ending the call, Sillin carried the unconscious Chiefing and Shueqiu out and passed them to Cheto. Take them to the Miracle Goddess's statue. Qiuqiu and Whis are heading that way. Leave this place immediately. This place is going to be cleaned. What about you? Cheto asked. You guys go first. I'll catch up later. Cheto nodded and stopped asking questions. He put on the protective masks for Chiefing and Shueqiu, grabbed them in each hand and ran outside. Cheto had released all the experimental beasts he had locked up in the base. Although the parasites didn't like them too much, the vapors of the parasite-infected puppets' blood were enough to drive them mad. The maddened experimental beasts fought against the base's guards and the uncontrollable parasite-infected puppets. Severed limbs and bloodstains could be seen everywhere. Gunshots, curses, screams of pain and roars of beasts were all mixed together. Cheto had activated a protective barrier around himself. Right now his main goal was to escape, not attack. That was why Cheto was nimbly weaving through the gaps between the giant experimental beasts. If there were any puppets blocking his way, Cheto would simply ram his way through them. Cheto's cannonball-like impact knocked the puppets over like they had been rammed by an armored car. After the gray cat received Sillin's message, it led Tang Qiuqiu away through a small, secluded passageway. The passageway was originally used to transport medicine and goods, so it was a little crowded even for an adult. It was even more impossible for the puppets and the gigantic experimental beasts to enter. Moreover, the parasites didn't give a damn about them either, so Tang Qiuqiu and the gray cat's escape was relatively smooth. Tang Qiuqiu had sniped a couple of experimenters and a dozen or so puppets. She had also found her emblem in an inventory room. In the face of the puppets that had already become inhuman, and the experimental beasts that were roaring and baring their fangs and claws, Tang Qiuqiu was much calmer than her peers. The environment in which she had grown up, coupled with the many things she had experienced later on, had tempered her mind and made her much more tenacious. Tang Qiuqiu did not ask what would happen to the others. After Huimao said that he would take her away, Tang Qiuqiu quickly followed behind Huimao without a word. In a hunter regiment, doing their job well was the greatest help to the team. Sillin looked at the time, left the lab and walked toward another passage. Under Cheto's command, all the access controls in this area were removed, and all the passages were opened. Sillin ran toward a certain direction. When Sillin walked into this area, he had a feeling that there was an inexplicable attraction from a certain direction in this area, beckoning Sillin to go there. Olilo's star map fragment. It resonated with the one he obtained from the Sky Prison Hunter Regiment's trader back at Sector S. Right now, the two fragments were attracting each other like two magnets. Although one was inside subspace, the attraction between them was as clear as day. A puppet covered in black and red blood rushed towards him. Sillin jumped up and stepped on the puppet's head before jumping far away. He flicked out his wrist blade and cut open the head of a puppet in front of him with a pop. At the entrance of the passage ahead, an experimental beast was fighting against a puppet. The narrow space of the passage limited the experimental beast's abilities, and the puppets had the advantage in numbers, and were much stronger than their original bodies before they were modified. It was a situation where both sides were heavily injured. The experimental beast was repeatedly stepping on some of the fallen puppets on the ground. Half of their bodies had been stomped into meat paste, but their heads were still there. Their mouths were open and closed, and their faces were covered in protruding meridians and black and red blood. It was a very strange sight. Sillin seized an opening and slipped through like a swimming fish. Before the puppets and experimental beasts could react, he quickly left. I'm almost there. After turning the corner, Sillin saw a room. The door to this room was closed, which meant that this room was not under AL's control. It was clearly in AL's network area, but it was not under AL's control. One could imagine how special this room was. Moreover, the star map fragment Sillin was looking for was inside this room. Since he didn't know if it required iris, fingerprints, genes, or something else to pass through. Sillin didn't use the information Cheto collected directly. He took out a button-like object and sucked it onto the scanner. A light screen popped up, and some characters appeared on the light screen. Sillin's fingers flew across the light screen. After the characters were combined and decoded, they flashed by one after another and slowly formed a double link. Mitochondrial DNA? Inside the room, Shelt was covered in blood. He was connected to the communicator while receiving treatment from the medical apparatus. He was panting heavily. However, no one answered his call. Shelt felt colder and colder, and the feeling of uneasiness grew stronger and stronger. This uneasiness escalated to a certain degree and turned into extreme anger. Although Shelt was usually simple-minded when it came to anything outside of experiments, he had finally thought through some things. Caldwell, are you trying to destroy this research base? Shelt's hand holding the communicator was shaking. He murmured, "You can't do this, you can't. These are all rare experimental data. You can't lose them, you absolutely can't lose them." Beep. The door opened. Shelt abruptly turned his head to look outside the door. A pungent smell came into the room, and there were roars and gunshots in the distance. There was no one outside the door. Who's outside? Shelt's voice was a little hoarse and filled with intense panic. There was no reply. Shelt barely managed to prop himself up. The hand holding the gun was still trembling. The broken bones and damaged muscles made even the smallest movement extremely difficult for him. It was already a blessing that he was able to make it this far alive. Pooh. A needle was pierced into Shelt's neck, and the toxins contained in the needle quickly seeped into Shelt's body. When Shelt fell, he only saw a hazy figure. Although the toxins attacked quickly, Shelt's tolerance to drugs had improved after so many years of research. He didn't faint immediately. Instead, he pointed to a cabinet. "Take it away." After uttering these two words, Shelt didn't make any more movements. The cabinet also had a password set, but it did not take Sillin much time to crack it. Opening the thick alloy cabinet, there was only a metal box inside, and the password to the metal box was Shelt's genetic sequence. After opening the metal box, Sillin saw a star atlas fragment and a chip inside. Without checking what was inside the chip, there was no time. Sillin searched the room briefly and came out. As soon as he stepped out, he saw an image. It was Elle, and the image was created by the system. A beautiful girl dressed in white, special eyelids, and a pair of snow-white wings on her back. Sillin thought that it was Elvia, the goddess of miracles from the myth of creation. Right now, Elle's image was unstable and flickering from time to time. "Are you Sillin? Is it the intelligent system you created?" Elle asked. Sillin frowned. It seemed that the AI system in the research base still had a buffer, and it still survived Cheto's interception. Sillin did not answer, but Elle continued. "I'm just telling you that I'm not my father's proudest creation. I'm just an eliminated one, and my father gave it to Shelt." "Who is your father?" "All I know is that people call him Juno. He's the one who created the strongest AI system in this world, not you." Elle's image disappeared with the last word. "Who is Juno?" Sillin put the question aside for now. Right now, the most important thing was to escape this place. There were only 3 minutes left in the 10 minutes that Lynette had mentioned. The research base was still filled with chaos and panic. The parasites seemed to have entered a hotbed as they gnawed on the puppets' brains madly. The puppets were even crazier, and the only thing left in their minds was slaughter. The experimental beasts were rampaging, and the gaseous environment inside the base was making them more and more irritable. The experimenters had become the sacrifices of both sides. And after the guards saw the situation, they no longer cared about what was going on here. They all had the mentality to escape. On the other side of the planet, there was a bustling city. Inside a tall building, Caldwell looked at the giant statue of the goddess at the edge of the city and said softly, "Some people are destined to become sacrifices. Shelt has undoubtedly brought great profits to Miracle. But even under such circumstances, he still cannot change his fate. He can only blame himself for being too conceited and not listening to advice." Many people had criticized Miracle for so many years because of Shelt's matter, but when these criticisms accumulated together, it became a different story. Finally, It exploded directly this time. Caldwell's words sounded dignified, but in fact, how could Shelt do these things without the tacit approval of the management? Boss, everything is ready. Let's begin. Yes. Caldwell looked at the image in his hand. The vast base was slowly expanding in all directions with a loud bang like a storm. Everything was sucked in, torn apart, and destroyed. The huge research base was reduced to ashes after this loud bang. Dust and debris were swept toward the city along with the wave of air, but the momentum was just right in front of the giant statue of the goddess, weakening to a bearable range. What was left was no different from an ordinary sandstorm. However, the sky full of sand and dust also blocked the view of some people. The giant statue of the goddess, Elvia, the god of miracles in the myth of creation. The wings on her back seemed to bear the pain for everyone. Her open arms and those smiling eyes that were wrapped in special eyelids were said to bring miracles to people. Pure white ankles were wrapped around her ankles, and they looked as if they were dancing in the sandstorm. And on top of this giant statue, between the folds of the goddess' skirt lay many people covered in dust. Fuck, poo, I blew it into my mouth. Cough, cough, cough. Fuck, that was close. Thank goodness I ran fast, or I would have been blown away. What the fuck are you shouting for? Is everyone here? Knight crouched down in the folds and said to the communicator. The group of 10 people reported their situation one after another. The statue of the goddess was huge, and there were a lot of folds on the goddess' skirt. Everyone arrived at different times and crouched down in different places. After confirming their positions, they slowly gathered toward Knight. Huimao, Tangqiuqiu, Cheto, and Cheto's Shueqiu and Chifeng had found a place to crouch down, but Silen's figure was nowhere to be seen. Silen, are you there? Knight spoke into the communicator again. Knight would ask every once in a while, but there was no reply until now. His temper rose again. Where the hell are you? Can't you give me a fucking squeak? Knight was yelling at the communicator when a flying claw suddenly flew toward him. He tilted his head to the side and evaded it. The flying claw landed on the protruding folds with a clang, and the thin threads attached to the claw contracted. Then, a person smashed over and collided with Knight with a bang, almost causing Knight to slip and fall down from the impact. Holy shit, fuck. Knight slid down and rolled on the ground. After he steadied himself, he kicked the culprit. Can't you just hit me somewhere else? Ahem. Silen wiped the sand off his face, and sat down with his back leaning against the protruding part of the crease. He ignored Knight's kick and smiled at him. I'm really sorry, this shitty environment is affecting my vision. Bullshit. How dare you hit me when it's affecting your vision? Knight kicked Silen a few more times while saying, Your claw almost smashed my head. You wouldn't be Knight if you were so easily smashed. Knight let out a snort and sat down next to Silen while leaning against the protruding wall. What took you so long? I ran into a little trouble, but I got something. Silen felt a lot more at ease after learning that everyone was here. My dad always says I'm restless, but you're even more restless than me, you bastard. Silen threw a punch at him. Who's your dad? Son, let's hear it. Fuck off. Silen's communicator rang while he was talking. It was Cheto. What's wrong? Silen asked. Something's wrong with Chifeng and Shueqiu. They've been injected with stimulants, and they're starting to react. I'll be there immediately. Silen turned around and said something to Knight before heading to where Cheto and the others were. It was still better to catch the grappling hook rope. It would be difficult to move barehanded in a sandstorm like this, so it was better to use the grappling hook to save time. When Silen arrived, he saw Chifeng and Shueqiu convulsing all over. Tangqiuqiu was looking at them worriedly from not far away. Huimao was standing in front of her, and Cheto was crouching beside Chifeng and Shueqiu. This is the analysis result of the drug's composition and effects. A small light screen appeared in front of Cheto. It displayed the drug's molecular formula and other relevant data. The sandstorm blocked the light from the sky, so Silen and the others were all shrouded in darkness. When the light screen appeared, their surroundings were illuminated. Shueqiu's pupils suddenly shrank when he felt the light from the light screen. Then his pupils abruptly widened, and his aura turned ferocious. He bared his teeth and pounced towards the direction of the light screen. Sillin borrowed the momentum from Shueqio's charge and kicked Shueqio's side, sending him crashing into the statue's body. He also used the rebound time to wrap the rope around Shueqio's body a couple of times, but Shueqio easily broke free. Chedo! Sillin yelled. After receiving Sillin's signal, Chedo's hands turned into tentacles and bound Shueqio. Although Shueqio was struggling hard, he couldn't break free for the time being. Sillin wanted to use this time to analyze the drug, but it didn't take long for Qi Feng to wake up completely. His long fingernails were even sharper than before, and they left many cuts on the statue. The hair on his body was so long that it made Qi Feng look even more like a wild beast than before. Sillin stopped Qi Feng from pouncing towards him and yelled at Qi Feng. "Look at me, Qi Feng! Look into my eyes!" Qi Feng's struggling and biting movements slowly came to a stop when he saw Sillin's eyes. It was as if a power was controlling him. "Look into my eyes, Qi Feng. Look." Sillin's deep voice brought Qi Feng into another world amidst the whistling sandstorm. "Qi Feng, do you remember what I asked you before you joined Vanguard? Tell me that answer again. Do you choose to be a human or a hellhound?" Qi Feng looked into Sillin's eyes, but his eyes were unfocused. After hearing Sillin's words, Qi Feng paused for a moment. "When? Human. Good. Since you've chosen to be a human, suppress the beast inside you. Don't let it control your body. Suppress it and control it. Suppress it, control it." Qi Feng repeated Sillin's words. He didn't attack again when Sillin let go of his claws. His eyes slowly closed and he collapsed. Sillin let out a sigh of relief. The hypnosis still has some effect. This means that the effects of the drug aren't that bad yet. After analyzing the drug once and combining it with the results Chedo had already analyzed, Sillin quickly came up with a temporary solution to the problem. He took out a few reagent bottles and injected Shueqio and Qi Feng with the medicine according to the calculated ratio. It was only after the duo's vital signs gradually returned to normal that he relaxed. "This is all we can do for now. We'll deal with them once everything is over. Right now we have limited resources, and the situation isn't easy to deal with." "What's wrong with them?" Huimao walked over and asked. "Some of their genes have been overstimulated, causing their consciousness to weaken. It's close to going berserk, but it's slightly better than that," Sillin explained. "How much longer is this going to last?" "I don't know. It depends. At the very least, we're not alone. The research base was destroyed, but the parasites were still alive, and the gas that came with the explosion was still there." Chapter 199. Considering the scale of the research base, the sandstorm caused by this level of destruction would last for at least an hour. The sky was still covered in sand, and the wind was still as strong as ever. If he wasn't wearing a protective mask, he would have had a hard time breathing, and every time he opened his mouth, sand would come out. "Read this chip, Chedo." Sillin took out the chip from the metal box and passed it to Chedo. The fact that Shelt had stored it in the same place as a Lillo's star map fragment meant that it was very important. At the very least, it was very important to Shelt. "Okay." Chedo accepted the chip, popped out a socket on his arm and inserted it. At the same time, rays of light shot out of his eyes and gathered into an image in front of him. At first, it was just some data. Sillin could still understand it, and most of it was about the research results Shelt had done in this research base of Miracle over the years. Inside the chip was a record of every experiment subject, whether it was a failure or a success. The number of human lives sacrificed for Eltech's research was in the 5 digits, and it was growing towards the 6 digits. The number of animals sacrificed was even higher. Large beasts and all kinds of rare and exotic beasts were consumed in large quantities. It could be said that this chip was Eltech's experimental record, and it was an important piece of evidence. With this, the League of Stars could officially sue Miracle Corporation, and the upper echelons would have a huge motivation to fight for power. However, as he continued to read the chip, he discovered that the contents behind it were all characters that looked like some kind of password. Every time he tried to read the chip further, he would be blocked by these characters. Chedo tried to decode it, but no progress was made even after several attempts. Sillin stared at the characters in silence. These characters weren't unfamiliar to him. They were used in many fields, but in different fields, Every character had a different extended meaning. So, what was inside this chip? Sillin carefully read the characters that repeatedly blocked the reading process again and again. Suddenly, he felt that they looked a little familiar. What on earth is it? Sillin couldn't think of it right now. Everything that had happened recently had complicated his thoughts. Sometimes he clearly felt a flash of inspiration, but he just couldn't grasp it. While Sillin was thinking, Huimao walked over and rubbed against Sillin's hand. It had eaten a full meal at the research base, and most of the experimental beasts Tang Qiuqiu encountered were eaten by Huimao. Some of them didn't taste good, but it was very full right now. It would sleep after eating, regardless of the situation. Sillin glanced at Huimao and knew that it was going to sleep again. He scratched Huimao's chin with his finger. Good boy, go to sleep. I need to think. Huimao snorted twice in dissatisfaction. This statue is not comfortable to sleep on. He looked around and saw Xiueqiu and Qifeng lying next to Tang Qiuqiu. He walked over, grabbed Qifeng's tail with his claws and moved closer to Xiueqiu. Xiueqiu's soft, round body, thick fur, and Qifeng's tail made this temporary nest not bad. Satisfied, Huimao curled into a ball and started sleeping. Sillin suddenly remembered something when he saw Huimao curling into a ball. If it's like that, it matched, it really matched. The sequence that appeared in Sillin's mind was connected to the characters. His fingers moved continuously on the control surface and rearranged the characters. Correct, passed. Correct, passed. Correct, passed. Cheto's eyes flashed as he stared at the flashing pass on the screen. Ever since he met AI, he had a desire to learn new technology that leaned toward a human's way of thinking. The reason Sillin said that Cheto was the one with the most potential was because Cheto had the ability to determine his own direction of development within a certain bottom line. Not all passwords are suitable for normal decoding methods. Sometimes it depends on the person and the situation. Sillin's words were directed at Cheto. He didn't want Cheto to develop in the same direction as the other robots. These characters are actually the commonly used codes for amino acid abbreviations transcribed in Skelt's mitochondrial DNA. After the characters were decoded, they flashed past each other and slowly formed a ring that looked similar to Skelt's mitochondrial DNA. Once the ring was complete, the image changed and some information appeared. It was a brief introduction to the later parts of the chip. Some representative names appeared inside, and they were all people related to Miracle. There were politicians, the military, and a few famous merchant groups from the League of Stars. Other than that, Sillin also saw a familiar name, Juno, the person who created AI. At the time, Sillin didn't have the time to analyze the last words AI had said, but he had to admit that her last words had shaken Sillin a lot. According to AI, Juno wasn't the only one who created this AI system. The fact that AI was able to be used in Miracle Corporation's research base meant that AI's ability as a system must have been recognized. But AI said that she was eliminated by Juno. Then where were the other AIs that hadn't been eliminated? Looking at the names displayed on the screen, he realized that this was only a part of it. The later parts of the chip must have involved a lot more secrets about Miracle and more people. The importance of this chip was definitely worthy of Skelt's attention. At first, Sillin was going to give this chip to Knight, but now it would seem that he couldn't do so. It wasn't that he didn't trust Knight. It was that Sillin had no choice but to take a lot of precautions against the military. He was just about to ask Cheto to copy the earlier parts of the chip and create a new one for Knight, but Sillin rejected the idea. Knight and the others were probably almost done with the research content by now. Giving it to Cheto now wouldn't help much, and it might even raise some people's suspicions. This chip must be very important to the higher-ups of Miracle, and the fact that Sillin possessed this chip must not be exposed. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for him to return to Vanguard. After thinking for a while, Sillin decided not to tell Knight about this chip. When he came back to himself, Sillin couldn't help but sigh at Skelt's madness. He actually hid such important information inside his own mitochondrial DNA. It was obvious that according to the comparison information and sequence profile analysis, Skelt's current mitochondrial DNA wasn't his original sequence. There were a lot of major flaws in this mitochondrial DNA sequence, and the physical diseases caused by them would often require the help of equipment in daily life. In other words, Skelt didn't hesitate to modify his own mitochondrial DNA in order to keep this information a secret, even if it left him with physical defects. What kind of madness was this? Skelt was a relatively extreme person. He made Sillin think of Ori, the man who hid underground all year round, used complicated and primitive methods to avoid the planet's investigation, and even modified himself to look like that. One should never underestimate the madness of such researchers. They were ruthless to others, but even more ruthless to themselves. After reading the decoded information of this mitochondrial DNA, the last piece of information shocked Sillin again and again. The remaining information in the chip was also blocked by some character codes, and it required a decoding method similar to the mitochondrial DNA sequence. However, the decoding method was no longer using Skelt's mitochondrial DNA, but the genomic DNA inside his body. Not only did he modify his mitochondrial DNA, he also modified the genomic information inside his body. He didn't modify it in the best and strongest direction, but in the direction of confidential information. Such a modification would lower his constitution and gene rank by several levels compared to his original state. Right now, Skelt's gene rank was C, and his handling genes were probably a rank as well. Turning himself from an A-rank person to a C-rank person wasn't just an ordinary kind of cruelty. Cheto, have you collected all of Skelt's genomic information? Sillin asked. Yes, I have. For safety's sake, I even took a portion of tissue samples to preserve. I also took a bit of somatic and gonadal cells. The corner of Sillin's eyes twitched. Gonadal cells. How did this guy take them? However, I discovered that there are two different sets of DNA in his gonadal tissue samples. One set is the same as the somatic tissue samples, and the other set is different. Sillin was astonished. Although this phenomenon existed in other races in the League of Stars, it was rare to see such a situation in the general human race, and Skelt was undoubtedly a general human. In that case, the information stored in the chip is twice as much as I imagined. He had always thought that Skelt was just one of the many important researchers of Miracle, but now it seemed that Skelt possessed far more information than he knew from his current position. Logically speaking, the higher-ups of Miracle shouldn't have done something like this so carelessly if Skelt's information was used to locate where he should be. Sillin suddenly thought of Al, the artificial intelligence system that Juno had gifted to Skelt. It seemed that most of this information came from Al. He recalled Skelt's words of taking when he collapsed, and the hateful gaze in his eyes. That gaze wasn't directed at Sillin, but at Caldwell, the manager who had ordered the destruction of the research base. Skelt had purposely given this chip to Sillin in order to take revenge on Caldwell. After putting away the chip and asking Cheto to keep this record a secret, Sillin settled Tang Qiuqiu down and checked on Xueqiu and Chifeng's conditions before contacting Night. At first, he was going to discuss the upcoming bitter battle with Night, but Night brought a piece of good news. The army's reinforcements would arrive in 6 hours. And as long as they could hold on for 6 hours, they would be able to survive successfully. Since the army could arrive in 6 hours, Sillin wasn't going to release the remaining parasite eggs. After the storm had passed, the killers Caldwell had sent to carry out the cleanup mission would definitely be waiting for Sillin and the others. The light gradually grew stronger, the sand and dust covering the sky thinned, and the wind gradually slowed down. What about Xueqiu and Chifeng? Tang Qiuqiu asked. The medicine can temporarily suppress the stimulant in their bodies for 20 hours. I'll give them another shot later to wake them up first. They won't go crazy like before under the medicine's suppression, Sillin answered. 10 minutes later, Sillin received Night's operation signal and gave Chifeng and Xueqiu a shot to wake them up. After waking up, Chifeng and Xueqiu felt that their memories were blank, but Sillin didn't give them time to recall. After explaining the operation's precautions en route, he began to move. If all the sand and dust stopped, then they would be completely exposed, and they would be in a more passive position. It was better to leave this place as soon as possible, find a place to hide, and snipe and counter-snipe. They had worked together at Seven Lights before, and although it was almost 4 years ago, Sillin and Night's cooperation was very smooth now. A gesture was all it took to know which route to move stealthily next. The western image showed the map and terrain of the city after scanning, and Sillin instructed Tang Qiuqiu and the others about their operation route. The gray cat opened its blurry eyes and yawned. It crouched at the edge of the fold wall and stared at the city that was separated by a layer of wind and sand. It said quietly, "Actually, there's another way. It's safer this way." "What way?" Sillin and Tang Qiuqiu looked at Huimao. Huimao licked his claws and said calmly, "Dig a hole." Sillin: "Our main goal right now is to delay until the military's rescue team arrives. It's not like we're going to attack. If we hide underground and perform a little surgery on their underground detection device, it won't be a problem to delay them for 6 hours." "But the truth is that you're too lazy to move, aren't you?" Sillin criticized inwardly. "You're the only one who can hide underground. How are we supposed to hide?" Huimao looked at Cheto. "This guy is an excavator." Sillin looked at Cheto. It sounded reasonable. "Where is the best place to hide?" Sillin asked. "The assassins would definitely pay attention to the ground when they were cleaning. Wouldn't it be obvious that something was wrong if they saw a hole?" Huimao looked around, his beard shook and he said with certainty, "From under the goddess' skirt." 2 minutes later, Knight stood beside the goddess' feet and looked up. There was a hole just big enough for one person to pass through in a corner where the skirt was covering. He couldn't even fart for a long time. In fact, they were prepared to fight a hard battle, but Yulu agreed with Sillin's idea. The most important thing in a mission was the result, not the process. Their job was to protect the evidence and hand it over when the reinforcements arrived. The hole above the ground was a little narrow because they had to pay attention to secrecy. But underground, the hole was a little wider and extended all the way to the bottom of a certain tall building in the city. The hole under the goddess' skirt was sealed again. It was very difficult to discover that there used to be a hole there, unless you looked carefully and didn't use any equipment. The aura and some small traces left behind at the goddess' skirt were swept away by the wind and sand. "This place isn't bad." Yulu nodded in satisfaction as he walked along the temporary underground shelter they dug. They always carried oxygen supply equipment with them when they moved, so they wouldn't suffocate even if the shelter was sealed. "Although we've blocked the scanning from above, we still can't know what's going on up there," Feng Haichao said with a frown. They were a little worried about a situation they couldn't control. "Cheto, go up and take a look," Sillin said. "That's not very good, is it?" Someone in Knight's squad objected. They didn't know that Cheto was a robot, so they were worried that he would be exposed if he went out. "It's fine." Knight shot Sillin a glance and stopped the 2 people in his squad from saying anything. "Let's do this, Cheto. Please." Cheto nodded in a gentlemanly manner, but he immediately started digging. They couldn't see his hand movements clearly, but it felt like the rocks and soil were parting directly to the sides, and Cheto was moving forward at a walking pace. The sound he made during the whole process was so soft that it didn't sound like he was digging a hole at all. Everyone in the military acknowledged a capable person, not to mention that he was a comrade who had gone through thick and thin together. Therefore, Knight's squad's impression of Cheto rose to a whole new level. They didn't notice that Cheto was digging a hole in front of them when they entered the cave, so they couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when they saw him now. At first, they thought that Cheto was holding a high-end machine that could open holes, but now it felt like Cheto's hands were digging in like tofu. And then he pushed the hole to the sides. Who would have thought that this kid was so skilled? After Cheto went up, he hid himself in a remote corner of the underground building and avoided the surveillance cameras. His body transformed and stuck to the metal objects around him. If someone came in to take a look, they wouldn't know that there was an intruder here at all. Cheto followed the surveillance network and transmitted everything that was happening around the building to Sillin, who was hiding underground. Due to the gas pollution that drifted over after the destruction of the research base, some people's nervous systems were affected. A portion of the manpower in the city was sent to deal with these people. There weren't many parasites left, so they were quickly taken care of by Crodwell's men. Some of the guards who escaped from the lab were killed by the assassins, and all the humans and beasts who escaped from the lab were taken care of by the people scattered around the city. However, in another tall building in the city, Crodwell was very angry because he hadn't found the intruders yet. He wasn't stupid enough to think that the intruders had perished along with the research base. Send more men and continue to search. Search thoroughly. Search the guards thoroughly. I'd rather kill the wrong person than let a suspicious person go. Crodwell roared angrily. The army would be here in a few hours, and if the rats found some bad evidence, Caldwell's future would be bleak. However, an hour passed. 2 hours, 3 hours. The sweat on Crodwell's forehead grew thicker and thicker. His communicator rang, and on the other end stood a man in military uniform with the insignia of a major general. Mr. Crodwell, long time no see. Chapter 200. The person with the rank of a major general might look young, but the steadiness and reserved sharpness in his eyes made it obvious at first glance that he was no ordinary person. Fiegler Holando. Caldwell almost growled the name out loud. He had always been gnashing his teeth at this name. Fiegler Holando was 10 years older than Knight. Due to his family background, he had joined the army a long time ago, and Holando had already started killing enemies on the battlefield before Knight had even entered the army. His personal ability and dazzling military achievements had allowed him to rise to the rank of a major general at such a young age. The reason Caldwell was gnashing his teeth at Holando like this was because Holando had targeted them more than once, and Caldwell had suffered a lot at Holando's hands. That was why Caldwell revealed an undisguised hatred the moment he saw this person. But compared to Caldwell's reaction, Holando was very calm. He was even smiling a little, and that smile was an eyesore in Caldwell's eyes no matter how he looked at it. According to the information Caldwell received, the army that had come in the name of formula inspection, this time wasn't Fiegler Holando. If it was anyone else, Caldwell wouldn't have lost his composure like this, but it was obvious that it was Fiegler Holando. This man would never give them a way out if he found an opportunity. Why is it you? The armrest of the chair in Caldwell's hand was left with a deep handprint. It must be known that the things Caldwell used were all of the highest quality, and for such an armrest to be left with a handprint like it was made of mud, one could imagine how Caldwell was feeling right now. In response to Caldwell's question, Holando only smiled. His smile made Caldwell want to rush over and stomp on his face. It can't be helped. Some people in the army are just too inefficient. I can't stand it. While Caldwell was sending people all over the planet to search for Sillin and the others were safe and sound underground. They could even receive Cheto's live stream. Knight, it's about time now. Should we contact the army? Someone asked. Knight shook his head. There's no telling who's leading the army this time. If someone over there leaks our location to Caldwell, then we're dead for sure. Based on Caldwell's personality, as long as there was a suspected base, he would do his best to destroy it. According to the plan, if there was something wrong with the reinforcements from the army, how could they be delayed? Or was it because the voices in the army weren't united? There were people who leaned towards miracle. Before this matter was over, Knight would never trust anyone without confirming the leader's identity. Stabbing someone in the back was the most unjust. Sillin checked on Chifeng and Shueqio's condition. Both of them were in a very bad state of mind. Although the medicine had suppressed the effects of the stimulant, it had also made them feel fatigued and unable to exert any strength. He could only hope that this matter would end as soon as possible, so that they could receive a comprehensive treatment. Keep them under control. Otherwise, there might not be anyone around to help you if something similar happens in the future, Sillin said to Chifeng and Shueqio. Chifeng gritted his teeth and nodded. The tuft of hair on his head had grown again. When Chifeng lowered his head, it covered his eyes so that no one could see his expression clearly. Sillin rubbed Chifeng's head and pulled him closer to himself. It was also a silent encouragement and comfort. Shueqio's round body was squeezed together with Tang Qiuqiu, and Tang Qiuqiu was combing its fur with her fingers. Lying in Sillin's arms, Huimao's ears suddenly twitched. His eyes were still closed, but his head had tilted slightly in a certain direction. No one else noticed this detail, but Sillin knew Huimao very well. It was probably the army. If it was one of Caldwell's men, the gray cat definitely wouldn't be as lazy as it was now. As expected, Cheto quickly sent a message saying that the army was approaching the planet. Don't go out yet. Let's see who's leading the army. Knight stopped his men from getting up and said, "Cheto, pay attention to the leader of the army," Sillin ordered. "Got it." Cheto followed the surveillance network and hacked into the defense system of some other buildings. At first, he wanted to hack into the satellite network, but Sillin told him not to take the risk this time. Therefore, Cheto only hacked into the information network on the ground. The light screen in front of Sillin showed the image of the army's warship. The League of Stars' military emblem was on the warship. Unlike Sillin's starship, the army's warship landed directly on the ground. It looked very dignified and intimidating. Moreover, before the battleship landed, many fighter aircrafts flew out from inside, densely packed together in all directions. Some aircrafts also flew out alone. They must have been assigned missions long ago, so they all flew away very straightforwardly. 2 of the 3 warships landed, and the last one stayed outside the planet to prevent certain accidents and prevent certain important figures of the miracle on the planet from escaping. After the warship landed, armored vehicles, tanks, and squads of infantry came out one after another. After that, Hulandu and his men slowly walked out. Hulandu looked at the nearby city and said, "Move out." "Yes." A major behind him saluted and left with his men. "Strange, we haven't received any news from those kids yet. Even the locator can't find their position." A person standing behind Hulandu looked at the light screen that had popped up from a disc in his hand, then glanced around and asked in confusion. "They're either completely wiped out or they're hiding very well." "Do you think they're completely wiped out?" The man looked at Hulandu. "How is that possible?" "We're from the Fiegler family, it's not that easy." The man only chuckled when he heard Hulandu's extremely confident words. "Let's go find those kids. I think they're in this city. It's just that we in Caldwell can't find them." When Hulandu and his men walked towards the city, Knight and the others who were hiding underground all had different reactions. "How could it be them?" Yulu asked doubtfully. According to his thoughts, the 2 of them shouldn't have come personally for something like this. They should have taken over later on. Otherwise, how could their team have met with such a delay? Feng Haichao said. Although the 2 of them weren't very high in terms of military rank, the significance they represented was great. Even if there were different voices in the army, no one would dare to openly obstruct the 2 of them when they appeared at the same time. These 2 were not to be trifled with, and the people behind them were even more so. At the same time, it meant one thing. There was already a conclusion to the matter of miracle. If it's them, then there's nothing to worry about. Ruolin stood up and stretched. His heart was finally at ease and he felt much more relaxed. After Sillin saw the Major General leading the army on the screen, he looked at Knight. The 2 of them looked somewhat similar. When Knight saw the 2 people on the screen, he cursed in a low voice. "Fuck, why are these 2 guys who usually don't show up here at the same time?" Although he was cursing, his eyes were full of smiles, and he no longer had the doubts and wariness from before. "Who are they?" Sillin asked. Knight pointed at the person who looked somewhat similar to him and said, "This is my cousin Fiegler Holando. He's 10 years older than me and has already become a major general." Knight then pointed at the person beside Holando. "As for this one, don't you think he looks familiar?" Sillin took another look. He did look somewhat like that arrogant fellow. "Someone from the Ji family?" Knight gave a thumbs up. "Pride's that brat's second brother, Ji Feihong. He's only a few years older than us, but he's already been promoted to lieutenant colonel. Pretty fast." "Then what about you?" Sillin asked with a smile. "Ahem, I'm not talented, just a mere first lieutenant." Suddenly remembering something, Knight gave Sillin a punch. "Didn't that guy Lung tell you?" "He did." "Then why the hell are you asking?" "I'm just asking. It's been almost a year. Who knows if you've been promoted?" I'll be promoted when I get back. I'll be promoted to colonel within a year." "Then I wish you a happy promotion in advance." In the League of Stars, the promotion of one's military rank was achieved through hard work. Just like this time, if they had not encountered Sillin, Knight and the others would definitely have experienced a difficult and bloody battle. "Are you preparing to go out?" Sillin asked. Knight looked at the time and said, "In another hour." Based on Knight's understanding of Holando, An hour was more than enough for the matters above to be settled. That would be the most suitable time to go out. Of course, Knight had another thought, which was to see if Rolando and Ji Feihong could find them within this hour. If they could not, then it could only be said that the people on Silen's side were indeed very capable. Above, Rolando was already facing Caldwell. This time it was an absolute suppression. If Caldwell resisted, he would be killed on the spot. This was because Rolando's actions had been approved by the higher-ups. Even if he blew up this planet, no one would say anything. Caldwell did not want to die yet, so he did not resist. He would not contact the assassins he had sent out. And if he did and was caught by Rolando, there would be yet another piece of evidence pressed against him. What Caldwell did not know, however, was that Rolando would find out about this sooner or later, and his methods of revenge would be even more vicious. After all, the people he had sent to kill were from the Fiegler family. After detaining Caldwell and some of the management personnel of Miracle, Rolando looked at Caldwell, who was still acting all high and mighty, and said calmly, "Don't hope that anyone will plead on your behalf. You're nothing but a sacrificial pawn." To Caldwell, these words were undoubtedly a sharp blade that pierced straight into his heart. How laughable. He, Caldwell, had just mocked Shelt as a sacrificial pawn, but a few hours later, it would be his turn. As a sacrificial pawn, he knew very well how the people behind Miracle did things. They would never let him live to the final trial. "You can't do this to me. You can't do this to me. I'm going to see." Before Caldwell could finish his sentence, he was knocked unconscious by a soldier indicated by Rolando. The main point of the instructions Rolando had received was not on the people behind Miracle. He had already received quite a few hints. What should be vague should be vague. There were some things that everyone knew even if he did not say them. Others might not know who was behind Miracle, but there was no way that person from the Fiegler family did not know. As for the evidence Knight was looking for, it was nothing more than an honorable reason to make a move. Moreover, this move was nothing more than a cover for the overall goal. Only when Hulanduo accepted this mission did he realize why the military had suddenly unified their voices. "Go look for it." Hulando gave Ji Feihong a look. Ji Feihong nodded and walked out with a small box in his hand. Not long after, Ji Feihong returned with the box. Nothing could be seen on his face, but the brief exchange of glances between Ji Feihong and Hulando proved that everything had gone smoothly, and the item had been obtained. Obtaining the item proved that the main objective of this mission had been achieved. "Since we've obtained the item, it's about time to let those little fellows out, right?" Ji Feihong put the box away and said with a smile, "But these little fellows sure have some tricks up their sleeves. Even now, I still can't figure out their exact location. All I know is that they're in this city." Hulando looked at the time and said, "They'll be out soon." The members of the Fiegler family more or less understood each other, and Knight and Hulando were people who were more familiar with each other's style of doing things. Just as Hulando finished speaking, the light screen on the circular detector in Ji Feihong's hand displayed a strong signal. "Oh, it's true. But it's actually here. According to the reports I received, this place has already been carefully searched. I didn't expect to be fooled by them." 10 minutes later, Knight brought his men to Hulando's side. "I didn't expect the two of you to come." Knight raised his hand and punched Ji Feihong. He only called Hulando, who was sitting on a chair with his legs crossed, "Bro." Then he dragged a chair over and sat down. "What a difference between a stranger and a stranger. If it wasn't for your somewhat similar face, people would have thought that Ji Feihong is your brother," Hulando said. Knight shrugged. "It can't be helped. You started too early, old bro, and the generation gap between us is too deep. Back when brother Feihong brought us to fight, old bro was pacifying Sector V's chaos." Hulando swept his gaze across the group of people sent over by the two squads of soldiers. In the end, his gaze landed on Silen. "Knight, aren't you going to introduce these people?" Silen's group was either an animal or a half-human, and there was even a child. When he thought about the situation from before, he felt awkward no matter how he looked at it. Knight introduced Silen briefly and told him directly about Silen's identity and his purpose in coming to this planet. As for some details, he did not explain. It was at this time that Rolando received a report from his subordinate that the 3rd and 6th B Squadron starships were heading towards this planet. The people who've come to pick you up are here. Rolando looked at the 2 starships on the display and said. Rolando did not make things difficult for Silen's group. In fact, he even sent a spaceplane to send them over. In reality, it wasn't that Rolando did not want to ask, it was that he could not. The way he looked at Knight was already glaring at him a few times. As for Ji Feihong, when he heard the name Silen, he looked at Silen with a meaningful gaze. The first time he heard the name Silen was from his younger brother Pride. Ji Feihong had no choice but to look at a person who could make the usually proud Pride give such a high evaluation. However, it looked like they would not have the chance to learn more about him now. 2 squads of the Hunter Regiment had come over to demand their people, so they could not hold them back no matter what. When Silen was facing Hulan Du and Ji Feihong, she did not show any special expression. There was no nervousness, and there was no obvious alienation. She just had a calm attitude, and she even gave Hulan Du and Ji Feihong a smile that could be considered sincere out of respect for Knight. However, that smile looked silly no matter how one looked at it. It made the corner of Knight's mouth twitch. Silen brought Tang Qiuqiu and the others on the spaceplane sent by Rolando, and arrived at the spaceport outside the planet. There was already a spaceplane waiting there. Shotten, Carrie and the others were all standing there. When they saw that Silen and the others were unscathed, they also let out a sigh of relief. Shotten stopped Carrie from speaking. We'll talk when we get back. After bidding farewell to Knight through the communicator, Silen followed Shotten back to the 6th Division starship. The first thing he did when he got back was to call Tico and Lycrabe over. Together, they gave Chifeng and Xueqiu a thorough checkup and treated them accordingly. After working for nearly 50 hours, they were finally released. After exiting the infirmary, Silen briefly told everyone about what had happened on that planet. No matter what, at least everyone was fine. Shotten also let out a sigh of relief. However, he was also rather angry at the Miracle Company. Who would have thought that the people of Miracle would be so daring? They clearly knew the identities of Tang Qiuqiu and the others, but they still dared to make a move. If they were from the A Squadron, the people of Miracle probably would not dare to touch them. It seemed that the 6th Division still had to hurry up and develop. After working for so long, Silen was unbelievably tired. After taking care of everything, he took a shower and lay down on his bed, ready to rest. However, before that, there was one more thing he had to take care of. He scooped up Huimao, who was lying on the edge of the bed pretending to be asleep, and rubbed Huimao's belly. Tell me, I haven't had a good sleep for a few days, and I've lost a lot of weight. Huimao snorted as he opened his eyes and complained. I've wanted to tell you for a long time, but you've been busy. I couldn't find the chance. After changing to a more comfortable position, Huimao said, When I was at Knight's place, I felt a familiar presence. What presence? The presence of Olilo's star map fragment. It's different from yours, but I'm sure that it's Olilo's star map fragment. Although there was no attraction between the different star map fragments of Olilo's star map, for someone like Huimao, attraction was not needed. Olilo's star map fragments all had some slight similarities. By remembering a presence, as long as there was an Olilo's star map fragment within a certain range, Huimao would be able to sense it, and he would even be able to tell if they belonged to the same star map. After hearing what Huimao said, Silen could think of many things along the same line. No wonder those two would appear at the same time. And no wonder the military's voices were unified so quickly regarding the miracle matter. The military of the League of Stars was a huge machine that should never be underestimated. Chapter 201. After they sent Silen and the others away, Hudu and Ji Feihong both asked about Silen, and the news they received shocked them beyond words. The fact that Vanguard was able to evade their detection and escape from so many puppets and experimental beasts proved that Vanguard truly lived up to its name. Even their B squadrons were impressive. After the matters of the Miracle Corporation's branch on this planet were settled, Hudu and Ji Feihong sat in a private meeting room. I remember that Silen was listed on the A rank in the secret report regarding the 6th Division, Hudu said. The military of the League of Stars had a secret list. At that time, the League of Stars would list out some famous forces or people who were as famous as the 4 great hunter regiments. From high to low, they were S, A, B, and C. The A rank ranking Sillin was mostly made up of a few captains of the 4 great hunter regiments and people from the 4 main squads. Although the Vanguard Division 6 Captain Shotten was a captain, he was not listed on the A rank ranking. Instead, it was Sillin who had just taken over as a vice captain not long ago who was listed on the A rank ranking. This was something Knight did not know. He had not reached the level to know about the ranking yet. That is true. Ji Feihong nodded. Because of pride, when he found out that there was a person named Sillin in the 6th B Squadron, he suspected that the assassin Pride spoke of wasn't actually dead, and that it was just a hunter regiment's ploy after completing their mission. It was exactly because he had done a special investigation and checked some military documents that Ji Feihong found out that this person had already been listed in the A rank ranking. How much do you know about him? A little. But the main reason he was listed on the A rank ranking was Wei Fun. The Wei Fun Ji Feihong spoke of was actually a mouse who once worked undercover in Poison Fang. His real name was Wei Fun. Wei Fun? The guy who snuck into Sector V to carry out a spy mission and was promoted to major after Poison Fang was eliminated? He actually has such a high evaluation of Sillin. Hulan Duo still had some impression of Wei Fun, because he knew that Wei Fun had been exchanged by the military from the Vanguard. Although Wei Fun was exchanged as a captive, no one dared to slander him. After all, Wei Fun had provided a lot of high-level intelligence over the years as a spy. Moreover, the biological samples he brought back from the army were highly valued by the higher-ups. Ji Feihong briefly explained what he knew and what he learned from Wei Fun. If what Wei Fun said is true, then this Sillin person is really dangerous. After all, he is still very young. Something like potential is too difficult to fathom. Hulanda sighed. When he thought of Knight, Hulanda suddenly said, based on what you said, Sillin isn't just a powerful individual. He also has a wide network of connections. Your Fiegler family's Knight, and Dryra family's eccentric Kailong, the CI family's CI Jincheng, the 4-star academician's old man Mo, and the one who surprised me even more was the Yu family's little grandaunt. All of these people are connected to Sillin. Hulan Duo let out a low laugh. Interesting. He stopped studying Sillin and asked, are there still no video recordings on the other side? No. All the surveillance devices are collectively blinded, and the research base's AI system, AL, has been hacked and destroyed. That Cheto is the only person who can escape our signal detection. It is very difficult to figure out his background. Hulan Duo crossed his arms and asked in puzzlement, Cheto, Sillin, what is their relationship? Before this, I don't remember this person being mentioned in the investigation report on Vanguard Division 6. Ever since the 6th Division came out of Sector Z, the military had investigated Vanguard Division 6 in detail. However, there was no such person as Cheto. Every B squadron absorbs new blood. This Cheto is probably one of them. Unfortunately, we don't have the chance to test their strength. Hulan Duo looked at the sky outside and said in a low voice, there will be a chance. Right now, Sillin was completely unaware that he was listed on the military's secret A-rank list. Right now, he was performing a final checkup on Chifeng and Shueqiu together with Tico and Lycrabe. The results are pretty good. At this rate, they should be able to fully recover in 2 days. Sillin patted Shueqiu's fat butt and grabbed the white fatty's ear just as he was about to slip away. Control your appetite for the next 2 days after you fully recover. Don't overeat. After being listless for a few days, the white fatty had lost a lot of weight and regained his vigor. He would probably eat to his heart's content until he had indigestion. Hearing Sillin's words, Shueqiu's ears drooped and looked pitifully at Sillin. There's no point in acting pitiful. We's keep an eye on him. If you see him overeating, give him a claw and make him lie down for a few more days. Got it? At the side, Huimao wagged his tail inattentively and ignored Shueqiu's pleading eyes. Chifeng became a little more diligent after he recovered. He sought out Carrie and the others to give him pointers on combat and marksmanship. Even in his sleep, he practiced piloting the virtual cabin. The experience this time was a pretty big blow to him. After the disappearance incident at the City of Trade, everyone realized that this was no longer the era when people didn't even dare to touch the squads of the Big Four. After dealing with Qifeng and Xueqiu, Sillin returned to his room and called Cheto over. Together, they read the chip's contents. Since he was bored, Huimao also joined in. There was a lot of information hidden in the two sets of DNA, but even Sillin was shocked by what he saw. There were too many people connected to Miracle Corporation, and there were some politicians who looked like they were worried about their allies and their people. In fact, they had secretly supplied Miracle Corporation with a lot of experimental subjects that came from unorthodox sources. The 13 backward sectors were especially populated by people. After all, most of the planets there were underdeveloped, and losing a few thousand people wouldn't affect them at all. It was possible to analyze the factional struggles between the political groups and the League of Stars' military from the list and its contents. Although Sillin couldn't do anything with these lists right now, it might come in handy in the future. To be honest, Sillin was a little disappointed. The Fujihara family wasn't included in the list. What kind of existence was the Hara family? Shoten had just finished reading the chip's contents when he received an urgent message and hurried to the main starship's conference room. It was a meeting. What happened this time? Sillin put away the chip and went to the main starship. What's wrong? Sillin asked. Shoten looked at the lieutenant commanders and pressed a button. A light screen appeared on the conference table and displayed a video. It was a video reported by a very influential media in the League of Stars. Olilo's cage. Sillin thought. He knew that the video was related to Olilo's cage the moment he saw it. Shoten might know a little about Olilo's cage, but the other lieutenant commanders didn't. That being said, Shoten briefly explained some things about Olilo during the meeting. He didn't go into detail though. He only explained the important points. If the conflict 50 years ago was about the universal energy, White Knight, then this time it was about another matter altogether. Moreover, it was under the military's control. Just as Huimao had predicted, Hulandu and Ji Feihong obtained an Olilo star map fragment from Miracle. Adding that the military already had such star map fragments, they pieced together the star map, found the key, and opened Olilo's cage. However, they didn't expect that Olilo's cage would be like this after it was opened. In the myth of creation, one of Olilo's cages was the god's back garden, that represented a fairyland. Surprisingly, the location of this god's back garden was actually a place in Sector Z. A lot of astronomers had once studied Sector Z, but due to the harsh space environment, their understanding of Sector Z was still at an elementary stage. However, a long time ago, some researchers had discovered a black hole area in Sector Z. What they saw through their binoculars was a large black area, and none of the probes they sent out had returned. Some said that it was a black hole, but according to the data provided by the probes on the outside, it wasn't a black hole. However, there was no other explanation. Those who were lucky enough to enter that area never came out again. The moment they entered the black area, all communication was cut off, and it was a permanent cut. Therefore, the League of Stars didn't have high restrictions on the development and adventuring of Sector Z. Sometimes they would even encourage hunter regiments and adventurers to enter the area, and then buy the information from these hunter regiments and adventurers at a high price. But now no one had expected that the black hole area was actually one of Olilo's. Since the military had publicized this footage, it meant that they either had the place firmly under their control, and the reason they released this footage was to increase their influence in the League of Stars, or they had run into an unsolvable problem and needed to find a solution from the public's hands. We don't know the specifics, but I've contacted the A-team. They said that 2 of our squads are to go there, and that the rest of Vanguard will receive us when the time comes. Shoten told the A-team's message to them, but Sillin's thoughts weren't on it. He already knew what the A-team's focus was, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The god's back garden, that represented a fairyland. The name alone was enough to tell that there would be a lot of rare things inside. And it must be beautiful. The released footage didn't reveal anything. The military didn't release the scene inside, and only the general appearance of the black hole area after it brightened up. This was the first Olilo's cage to be opened in so many years. Not even that white knight had truly opened it before. As the first Olillo's cage to be opened, the matter behind it must be unimaginably complicated. No one could say for sure if the incident from 50 years ago would repeat itself, especially after the incident at Sector S. Sillin thinks that Mist and Wuxia were the ones who had been too quiet after the incident at Sector S, as if they had never appeared in the first place. There was also Azrael. Every incident involving Azrael was devastating. Sillin had a feeling that these guys would all appear at God's back garden this time. No matter what, we will cancel our previous mission plan and head to Sector Z with the 3rd Earth Division Squadron, Shotten said solemnly. Since the arrangements were made, the other lieutenant commanders had nothing more to say. After the meeting was adjourned, they would have their subordinates make preparations. In truth, everyone in the 6th Division had a strange feeling towards Sector Z. After all, their previous experience at Sector Z was too tragic. But as hunters, they had to get used to it. Sillin, you stay. Just as Sillin stood up and was about to leave, Shotten stopped him. After the other lieutenant commanders had left, Shotten asked, "What do you think about this incident?" "What do I think?" "Amen. Tell me what you think." "Actually, we didn't see much from our position. The A squad has never interfered with the squad's business, and if they did, it would be a big deal. Since the A squad has asked us to do this, we will go. However, there are some questions that I still want to understand," Shotten said with a frown on his chair. Sillin shook his head. "I'm not in a position to comment on the Olillo cage, but I think the A squad sent us to support them in this incident." Shotten nodded. He had considered this as well. It was fine as long as they weren't cannon fodder. With the style of the upper echelons of the 4 great hunter regiments, they usually wouldn't let their subordinates be cannon fodder. If they did, it would be very difficult to absorb new blood as a supplement in the future. Our B squadron isn't the only one going over this time. I believe that the other B squadrons will also go over one after another. Since Vanguard has done this, the other 3 of the Great 4 will also do the same. This way, the implications will be much wider. If the military intends to have a dispute, once a fight breaks out, it will definitely cause great damage to the entire GL. They won't do such a stupid thing. Shotten had thought about all the aspects Sillin had mentioned before, but after Sillin gave him a confirmation, Shotten also let out a small sigh of relief. After all, the 6th Division had developed to its current level after much difficulty. If they were to suffer another great blow, Shotten would vomit blood. After speaking for a while more, Sillin finally left the meeting room and went back to inform everyone about the upcoming formation and things to pay attention to. There was no need to emphasize it any further, and everyone quickly got into the mood. Sector Z was a sector that left a deep impression on them. If they weren't prepared, they might lose their lives. After giving out orders, Sillin returned to his room and closed his eyes to think on his bed. There were many things he wouldn't tell Shotten directly. It would expose too much of himself. Sillin wasn't ready to take out the 2 Olillo star map fragments he had yet. Now wasn't the time yet, and taking them out would only bring destruction to the entire 6th Division. As he thought, Sillin felt a little tired and slowly fell asleep. Who's talking? In a daze, 2 voices appeared in Sillin's mind. Other than the voices, Sillin also vaguely felt a familiar and strong magnetic field change, air pressure change, and a sudden change in temperature that rose more than 50 degrees in a second before falling below 0. His surroundings were dark, and he couldn't see anything. He could only hear the hazy voices, the sounds of fighting, the strange gunshots, and the strange yet familiar energy fluctuations. Suddenly, Sillin felt a heavy blow to his abdomen, shattering all the voices and sensations. Sillin abruptly opened his eyes and saw Huimao bouncing on his stomach. Letting out a long breath and wiping the sweat off his forehead, Sillin mumbled, "What the hell are you doing?" We stopped bouncing when it saw that Sillin had woken up. It stared at Sillin from head to toe with its round cat eyes and moved its ears a little. Then it said with a grateful look on its face, "You were very strange just now. You looked like you were in hibernation, but your heartbeat was very fast and irregular, and you were sweating a lot. Look at you, you're wet, sticky, and dirty. You didn't respond when I called you." That's why I did it. Hearing Huimao's words, Silin was stunned. Hypnosis? Silin thinks laughed. He had hypnotized others so many times, but he didn't expect that he would be the one being hypnotized. If his analysis was correct, the person who hypnotized him was one of the two voices he heard at that time. As long as Silin thinks thought about what happened at that time, he would be affected by the voice and would not be able to calmly analyze what happened at that time. However, Silin was puzzled as to why that person chose to hypnotize him instead of killing him directly. It should be known that Silin did not have the slightest ability to resist at that time. Moreover, in that kind of situation, it was almost impossible for him to survive. Silin sat up and scratched Huimao's chin. Thanks. Huimao narrowed his eyes and snorted. You had a nightmare, right? I knew it. I wasn't the only one who had a nightmare. What was your nightmare about? Silin asked as he scratched Huimao's chin. At the mention of this, Huimao's beard trembled. It was about fish biscuits. That day, I dreamt that all the fish biscuits in my cupboard grew legs and ran away. That's why you ate them all the next day. No wonder he saw this glutton squatting there and eating a cupboard full of fish biscuits that day. The floor was covered in crumbs, and Silin had to clean it for a long time before he could get rid of the fishy smell. I didn't have that dream again after I ate them, Huimao said proudly. Proud my ass. What an idiot. Silin was utterly speechless towards this cat. Oh right, are we still going to the planet where we discovered the special energy mine at Sector Z? Huimao asked expectantly. When we reach the edge of Sector Z, we will decide the best sailing route. If it's not on our way, then we won't go. If it's on our way, then we can go and see how the planet has been modified. I hope it's on our way. I missed the fish there. Amen. If it's on our way, then let's go and get more living creatures. While Silin and the others were sailing towards Sector Z, many people from the 4 great hunter regiments were also rushing towards Sector Z. At that time, it would be the true gathering of the 4 great hunter regiments. No one could say for sure what kind of collision would occur, but one thing was for sure. This time, it would be the most influential gathering in the entire League of Stars. Chapter 202. The God's Back Garden, that the military had just opened, was located at the center of Sector Z. The strange thing was that after this black hole area was lit up, the space environment of Sector Z underwent a 180-degree change. The ordinary magnetic field anomaly had also gradually stabilized, and the occasional large-scale ion storms had mostly stopped since the activation of God's Back Garden. The existence of the former black hole area was actually a form of protection for Sector Z. Sector Z was incredibly rich in resources, and while the Special Energy or Silin and the 6th Division might not necessarily exist on the other planets in Sector Z, there were definitely a lot of them that were of similar grade. Once Sector Z's space environment became ordinary, then it was undoubtedly a huge piece of fat meat. The League of Stars' military alone would not be able to swallow it all. This was probably one of the reasons why the military had announced all of this directly. According to the news that the League of Stars' 10 great business families represented by the Andryra family, the 4 great hunter regiments, and some other high-ranking hunter regiments and famous adventurer groups had all received an invitation from the military to discuss how to split this huge cake. When the Dark Triangle was no longer the Dark Triangle, and Sector Z was developed by the various forces, the fate of Sector Z would change from then on. It was not hard to imagine that Sector Z would no longer be one of the 13 backward sectors after this incident. It would become a developed sector, and the 10 trade sectors would become the 11 trade sectors. Due to the change in Sector Z's space environment and the military's direct permission, Silin and the others' entry into Sector Z was very smooth. According to the star map, that so-called God's Back Garden is located in the triangle Sector Z, and it is at the same distance from every vertex of the triangle. Yudi explained some of the results of his calculations to the crowd. This means that this area may be artificially controlled. It would be too much of a coincidence if it's natural, Beaver said. Everyone's thoughts were more or less the same. The real question was, who exactly developed this area? Who had the ability to produce such results? Carrie scratched his head. Does this mean that the lit area controls the entire Sector Z's space environment? When this area was still a black hole, Sector Z's space environment was so bad, but it stabilized after it was lit. I don't think so, Sillin said. The worse the environment is, the better it is for the creation of special energy ores. The fact that there are so many special energy ores, special species, and rare metals in Sector Z means that Sector Z's environment is different from other sectors. I agree with Lieutenant Sillin's opinion. Yudi switched the image on the light screen, and Sector Z's history appeared. This history may not be complete, and there are obvious traces of embellishment, but the most important thing is that Sector Z's harsh environment has always existed. Sillin knew about Olillo's incident more than 1,000 years ago, but there were records about Sector Z even earlier. At the time, Sector Z was still the famous Dark Triangle, and it was like this even before the Alliance was founded. According to the history Yudi released, there were no records about Sector Z's black hole at the time. Although it bore the name Dark Triangle, there was no explanation about the black hole at the center. Sector Z's black hole appeared more than 1,000 years ago, and it was also when Olillo appeared. Xiao Shang rubbed his chin. Sai, do you guys think that a higher civilization had appeared there before? Otherwise, even the League of Stars wouldn't be able to achieve such a feat right now, would they? Yudi glanced sideways at him and said, We'll know if it's a higher civilization after we go there. If it's a higher civilization, we can see it clearly from the building traces there. Sillin looked carefully at the records about Sector Z on the image. It was a record from 1,000 years ago. Something's not right. Sillin pointed at the description of Sector Z. No matter how I look at it, the records are even scarier than the Sector Z we know. If that's the case, we couldn't have traveled safely at the time, and we couldn't even stay at the borders of Sector Z. Yudi nodded. I've always thought that the people of that era were exaggerating things, but looking at it now, it may be true that the records are true. It's just that the center of Sector Z had improved after it appeared, and in order to hide that area, someone had used certain methods to make Sector Z's cosmic environment turn hostile once more. But that area is real, so no matter how they tried to hide it, Sector Z is no longer as hostile as it was 1,000 years ago. Something suddenly became clear in Sillin's mind. The Wonderland Olillo was talking about wasn't just that lit-up area, but the entire Sector Z. The lit-up area was admittedly the core, but that area's existence was to improve Sector Z. Once it was improved, the entire Sector Z would become a fertile land. This was a huge gift. In reality, the conclusion of Sillin's squad's discussion was more or less the same as the military's analysis. Since the military possessed more information, they were certain of this conclusion. Unlike Sillin's squad who were only guessing. After a period of flight, the 3rd B Squadron and the 6th Division arrived at the coordinates given by the A Squadron at the same time. At the time, the image released by the military was blurry, and no one could see the full picture of the lit-up area clearly. But now that they saw it with their own eyes, it was truly amazing. There was a star in its prime in this area, and the planets orbiting this star each had their own unique characteristics. Among them was a giant planet with a rank A habitability. There was a satellite belt around this planet, and on these satellites were some asteroids with rank B and C habitability. However, both the satellite belt and the giant planet were guarded by the military right now. The few planets with rank C habitability and above were all under the military's control. Seeing the military forces dispatched by the League of Stars, there was no way they could keep this a secret even if they didn't announce it to the public. The most amazing thing was that there was a platform between this giant planet and the satellite belt. Yes, a man-made platform that was much bigger than the spaceport Sillin had seen before. It was obvious that this was the spaceport of this giant planet. The spaceports he had seen before were like fishing boats compared to an aircraft carrier. There were many fortress-like buildings on this platform-shaped spaceport. The buildings were surrounded by energy shields, and the military starships, fighters, and aircrafts were parked in the open areas. Under the flashing light of the energy shields and the illumination of the star, the entire spaceport flashed with a mesmerizing light. It was incomparably dazzling. Who the hell built all of this? It's too fucking cool. Sai say, how cool would it be if Vanguard's spaceport was built like this? Carrie wanted to stick his face to the display screen. Although Yudi was also very surprised by this spaceport, he still mercilessly attacked Carrie's words. If Vanguard's spaceport was built like this, how much energy would it consume every day? We don't have as much capital as the military. Carrie curled his lips, but he didn't retort. That giant planet was definitely out of the question. Cheto and Huimao could feel the planet's domineering defense network just from its periphery. The coordinates given to them by the A Squadron were located on a rank B habitability asteroid in the satellite belt around the largest planet. Although the planet was marked as a rank B habitability planet, Sillin felt that the environment here was even better than the rank B habitability planets in other sectors. If it was just a little bit better, it would reach the requirements of a rank A habitability planet. This kind of environment was already very good for Sillin and the others. The A Squadron had built a temporary spaceport on the outskirts of the planet. Looking at the two starships parked inside the spaceport, it was obvious that some B squadrons had already arrived. They weren't the first to arrive. After parking the starships, Sillin and the others boarded a spaceplane and flew to the asteroid. Some fortresses had already been built on the asteroid. It was obvious that they were going to be stationed there for a long time. Sillin and the others below the rank of lieutenant commander were resting at their assigned places. As the captain, Shotten had already rushed over to report in. A communication network had already been built on the asteroid. Everyone had adjusted the frequency of their communicators so that it would be easier to communicate on the planet. However, Sillin had just stopped when someone informed him that a guest had come to visit. Me? Who is it? Sillin asked in puzzlement. The person in charge of notifying the guest had an odd look on his face. You'll know when you come over. The A Squadron had built a reception point on the asteroid. Inside this reception point, a certain someone was holding a cup of tea with his legs crossed and a book open on his lap. He was drinking tea and reading at the same time. Most of the people in charge of the reception point were Vanguard's A Squadron members. Of course, they hadn't reached Songba Leruo's level yet. Not every A Squadron member was promoted from a captain to a captain. Although the youngsters in charge of the reception point were usually a little arrogant, they restrained their arrogance in front of the person who was leisurely drinking tea. Although there was no kindness or malice in their eyes, there was a hint of admiration. A 16 or 17-year-old girl was talking to her friends about the person sitting there. Hey, did you see the emblem on his chest? One of the girls' eyes were full of stars. Another girl replied, how could I not see it? It blinded my eyes. Gentleman knowledgeable. He doesn't look much older than us, right? He's already a one-star academician at such a young age. A one-star academician at the League of Stars Research Institute. What's wrong with his head? But usually a gentleman isn't necessarily what he looks like on the inside. A gentleman is nothing more than a patient wolf. What's there to be afraid of? Patient wolf. Forget it. A few boys next to them rolled their eyes. Hey, you two, be more reserved. What's there to be reserved about? The two girls sneered. It's not easy to find a satisfactory target. Yeah, do you think the child's IQ would be very high if he were to have a child like this? Last time I heard someone say that the child's IQ is more related to the mother's. How can that be? Last time, they said that my IQ was close to that of a modern ape. Don't be afraid. In terms of combat strength, they are like eggs in the hands of a modern ape in front of you. The boys around them sweated profusely as they listened. They glanced at the person who was still sitting there reading peacefully, as if he didn't hear what was going on around him. They sighed in their hearts. Such determination. Sillin walked in while the juniors in the home team were discussing. Seeing the person who looked like a senior academic sitting there reading and drinking tea, Sillin said in pleasant surprise, I didn't expect you to come. As he spoke, Sillin strode over. Ci Jincheng, who was sitting there drinking tea, raised his eyes to look at Sillin. He elegantly put down his teacup, closed his book and placed it beside him. Then he stood up and gave Sillin a flying kick. The surrounding crowd. The word gentleman was directly erased from everyone's minds. Sillin, who was kicked, was sent flying in a parabola. But not long after, he walked in with a chuckle and gave Ci Jincheng a hug. Then, he hammered Ci Jincheng's shoulder and pointed at the emblem on his chest. Yo, not bad. You're an academician now. Ci Jincheng looked at the face in front of him expressionlessly. It was just as Knight and Lung had said. Stupid no matter how I look at it. Patting the leg of his pants, Ci Jincheng said. Aren't you going to invite me over to your place? We need to have a good talk. Of course, academician Ci. Please. Ci Jincheng suddenly paused after taking 2 steps and said. Sir Mo has also been invited over. He's on that main planet right now. Speaking of Sir Mo, Sillin really didn't know how to face him. Although he had sent a few coded messages in between, sending messages and meeting him were 2 different things. If he met him in person, his already stupid face would probably become as stupid as a pig's head. Oh right, I forgot to tell you. Ci Jincheng revealed a gloating smile. I've already told Sir Mo before I came here. I think in another, 2 hours, Sir Mo should be done with his work by then. Fuck. After Sillin and Ci Jincheng had left, the youngsters gathered together once more. Hey, who was that guy just now? I don't know, he looked a little stupid. TSK, look at your eyesight. That's called concealment. You guys actually don't know who that guy is? He's a helicopter member who was internally selected beforehand. So you're saying that guy is at the captain level? A girl asked. I don't think so. But I heard from my father that that guy was internally selected by the higher-ups a long time ago. As long as he's willing, he can directly enter the A Squadron at any time. He's that good. Anyone who was promoted to the A Squadron from a branch team was someone with true strength. No matter what kind of background you had in the Vanguard, you had absolute strength. I really didn't expect there to be such a person in the branch. You don't know, do you? Let me tell you guys. Sillin did not know what those youngsters would say about him. Right now he was facing Ci Jincheng's fierce criticism. As expected of a academician-level figure of the League of Stars Research Institute. He had probably traveled to various sectors to give lectures many times already. After a series of criticism, he didn't even drink a cup of water. And it looked like he was going to continue. Huimao stared at Ci Jincheng on a cabinet not far away with a pair of round eyes. Was that the researcher Sillin was talking about? Although Sillin said that this was a good researcher, but were there good researchers in the League of Stars? That being said, watching Sillin get scolded was a very satisfying thing. While Ci Jincheng was listing out the troublesome things that had happened during the years when Sillin played dead, Sillin's communicator rang again. Mo hung, old Mo had arrived. Sillin did not need to go to the reception area to pick him up. Old Mo had volunteered to come personally, and with Old Mo's status, naturally he would be accompanied. Sillin's face twitched. It would be fine if they came one by one, but he would probably drown in their saliva if they piled up together. Hearing that Old Mo was coming over, Ci Jincheng stopped talking. He picked up his tea, took a sip, crossed his legs, and put on an expression that said good luck. People like Sillin who understood Old Mo's temper knew that the old man could put on airs and be amiable normally. But in the words of Seven Lights vice headmaster and Ting, he was a senior academic ruffian. Speaking of which, Old Mo had already thought things through when he received the military's invitation. There was no doubt that the newly opened God's Back Garden was attractive, but at the same time, he also knew that various major forces had also been invited, and all of them had mobilized a lot of manpower. That little bastard disciple of his would probably be among them. That was why Old Mo had arrived very early. At the time, Vanguard's B squadrons had not arrived yet. The old man took a general look at the newly opened area, and just as he had analyzed earlier, it was not built by a higher civilization. While he was arranging everything, he received Ci Jincheng's message. He could not sit still the moment he heard that the 6th Division had arrived. He was planning to supervise the current project to completion, but his hands just couldn't stop itching. Since he could not calm down and supervise the project, he let another engineering scholar take over, and sent him to the little planet where Vanguard was located. Now that Old Mo had arrived, the ones to receive him were definitely not the juniors. The A Squadron had specifically sent someone over, and the one to receive Old Mo was one of Vanguard's high-ranking officials, Suali. Suo Li's status and influence in Vanguard was much greater than Song Baleruo and Bart's. The fact that this high-ranking official showed up in person immediately shocked the youngsters at the reception point. They really did not expect that an important figure like Suo Li would personally come to visit them. Suo Li and old Mo could be considered old acquaintances. He sighed about the things that had happened over the years as he walked towards the 6th Division. Along the way, he ran into Bart and Song Baleruo, who had just returned from a mining planet. After exchanging greetings, the duo did not linger and headed straight for the 6th Division's temporary base. What's going on? Why is that old man here? Bart said while stroking his long beard. Song Baleruo did not answer. The corner of his lips curled meaningfully, and he turned around to continue walking. Over at the 6th Division's temporary base, Sillin was rubbing his face thoughtfully when he suddenly heard a loud roar from outside. Get your ass over here, Sillin. Chapter 203. Mo Heng's roar immediately aroused the curiosity of the 6th Division and the 3rd B Squadron, who were resting in the neighboring building. They stretched their necks and looked over, and some of them even secretly adjusted their surveillance cameras and watched from inside the house. A few of the lieutenant commanders recognized Suo Li, so they were even more puzzled. Just what kind of person could make Suo Li accompany him so patiently? Behind Sir Mo were 2 people from the military, and there was also a team of guards at the reception point. The lowest rank of these guards was a major, and they were all here to protect Mo Heng. The 2 people following Mo Heng were both major generals. It was clear how influential Mo Heng was in the military. However, Suo Li was the only one who knew about this. The people of the 6th and 3rd B Squadrons did not know about this. None of the people protecting Mo Heng were wearing military uniforms or badges, but it was obvious from their movements that they were from the military. It was just that they did not know their ranks. Hearing Mo Heng's voice, Sillin hurriedly walked out. It had been a few years since they last met, and to be honest, he missed the old man a lot. He had only seen Sir Mo's image in a few electronic magazines with high contribution points. But that was the side Sir Mo wanted others to see. The other side was only known to those close to him. For example, right now, when Mo Heng saw Sillin walking out, he examined him from head to toe. Before this, Mo Heng had seen Sillin's current appearance, but after seeing it in person, he still couldn't help but sigh. Look at this kid's stupid face. Since there were a lot of people watching, Sir Mo was merciful enough to not make a move. Let's talk inside. Mo Heng put his hands behind his back and walked straight inside with a straight face. After you. Sillin let out a sigh of relief. If Mo Heng were to pull his face right now, Sillin's prestige would probably drop to 0. The fact that he was pulling a straight face proved that Mo Heng wasn't really angry right now. On the contrary, Sir Mo must be plotting something. This was what Sillin guessed based on his understanding of Mo Heng. As expected, the moment he entered, Mo Heng's hand reached out from behind his back and grabbed Sillin's face. Squatting on a tall cabinet not far away, Hui Mao's mouth was wide open. Oh my, this old man is even crueler than CI. He actually pinched his face. The faces of the 2 major generals behind Mo Heng twitched. Old Master Mo's old habits were acting up again. They had seen with their own eyes how Elder Mo had pinched the face of their boss, the famous general of the League of Stars, until it was red. Suo Li, who had followed them in, looked at the master and disciple pair with great interest. He had only heard a few things about Sillin from Bart, Nada, and Song Baleruo. Even Ji Feng had praised Sillin, so he couldn't tell much about Sillin at such a close distance. You're really heartless, aren't you? Yes. If you say so, then it must be. Elder Mo continued to reprimand Sillin until he was done. Seeing the red marks on Sillin's face, even Suo Li and the 2 generals felt pain in their balls and faces. Then, as expected, there was a barrage of criticism and reprimand. He had finally said all the words he had been holding back for so long, and he had scolded everything that needed to be scolded. He beckoned with his hand, and a major general carefully brought over the box he was carrying and a spherical instrument. The moment he saw this, Sillin knew that Mo Heng was going to check his homework. Sillin hadn't used the instrument to measure the overall accuracy for years, But it shouldn't be lower, right? Silin brought Mo Hung to a temporary workshop, and Ci Jincheng came over to join in the fun. Hui Mao wouldn't miss this opportunity either. Cheto, who was in the next room, didn't need to go over to watch. He could know what was going on inside through the surveillance network and the monitors in the workshop. Also, he was responsible for destroying the recording after this incident. It was Silin's order. Mo Hung carried the box over and put it on the table. Then he carefully took out a pile of parts inside. They were all finer parts. He pressed a button on the circular instrument, and it floated up to reveal a scanning hole in Silin's direction. At the same time, a light screen popped up on top of the prototype, displaying some basic test data. Even Sua Li was a little surprised when he saw the data. It wasn't a lot of parts, but there were almost 100,000 of them. Needless to say, Silin began to move after he pushed aside the parts and took a look. A major general brought over a chair and let Mo Hung sit down. Then, everyone's eyes were subconsciously drawn to Silin's movements. Every time Mo Hung watched Silin assemble, it was like he was admiring a rare work of art. Mo Hung had used one of Silin's assembling videos as a teaching example, but it was more of a deterrent than a guide. After all, there were too few people who could do what Silin did. And not even some of the great instructors in Seven Lights could do it. After Silin had left, every Seven Lights student who had seen the assembling video tried to inquire about the person who did it, but all the instructors who knew the inside story shut their mouths at the same time and said that it was someone related to Mo Hung. Until now, the video was hailed as a classic by the students of Seven Lights. Mo Hung knew from experience that Silin had definitely improved without even looking at the instrument. He would know the answer he wanted as long as he moved his eyes away to look at the data on the light screen of the instrument. But Mo Hung could not bear to move his eyes away. It was undeniable that watching Silin assemble was a pleasure in itself. Unlike the sense of urgency some so-called senior engineers and technicians had when they were assembling, Silin's movements looked very comfortable to the eyes. It was as natural as breathing. However, in reality, Silin's movements were very fast, so fast that it was easy to overlook some of his movements. Even so, it didn't affect the smoothness of his movements at all. Different people, different levels of strength, and different angles of view would more or less miss some of his movements, but all of them were slowly attracted by Silin's hand movements without any prior agreement. At this time, no one in the audience would think about how this person was able to distinguish the order in which the parts were assembled, or why this person knew what parts to assemble without looking at the fitting parts. The audience's mind was actually very empty. As Silin's hands moved, the thoughts in their minds were unconsciously emptied out, and the only thing left in the empty world of their minds was an object that was slowly taking shape. 10 minutes later, a finger-thick, half-meter-long mechanical snake was assembled. The two major generals immediately shuddered. They had actually been distracted just now. If someone had tried to harm Mo Hung during this period of time, they would not have had the time to react at all. People like them who had gone through strict training and experienced countless battlefields actually had their thoughts emptied out. Although part of the reason was because they believed that Silin would not harm Sir Mo. As guards, they had still underestimated Silin. In the face of a person like Silin, even the slightest bit of negligence could put them in a passive position. Now they finally knew why Silin had entered the A-rank list of the military secret files. The people around Mo Hung would certainly do some research on Silin. With their status in the military and the secret information provided by General Mo Qing, they naturally knew a lot of things that others did not know, especially about Silin. At this time, they even wondered how long it would take for Silin to enter the S-rank list. The assembled mechanical snake did not look like a mechanical snake at all. The special materials and precise assembly made the little snake look no different from a real one. It nimbly circled around Silin's arm, raised its flat triangular head to look at Mo Hung and the others, and flicked out its tongue. Mo Hung swallowed. When Silin's hands stopped moving, his mind was no longer on the little snake. He did not need a detector to test the snake's qualification. He could absolutely confirm that it was a high-rank qualification. Mo Hung tilted his head to look at the data displayed on the holographic screen. One of the columns showed a series of numbers. The first few times, the comprehensive accuracy reached the theoretical value of 99. 98%, but after 3 steps it reached 99. 99%, and it had maintained this data since then. Mo Heng's old face was flushed with excitement. His mouth trembled, but he could not say a word. After taking a deep breath, he completely forgot to exhale. Master, take a deep breath, take a deep breath. Don't forget to exhale. Sillin hurriedly reminded Mo Heng. Mo Heng stood up abruptly. You. Mo Heng directly grabbed Sillin's face. After saying you for a long time, he still could not say you. His breathing quickened, causing the 2 major generals and Suali to be afraid that something had happened to the old man. Master, breathe. Take a deep breath. Breathe slowly, Sillin said. Slow my ass. Mo Heng almost roared. The corner of Suali's mouth twitched. This was the behavior of a dignified 4-star academician. After Mo Heng let go of Sillin's face, he spun around in circles. Seeing this, Sillin and the others were puzzled. What was wrong with the old man? While Sillin was thinking, Mo Heng suddenly paused and pointed at Sillin. You're coming with me to that planet in a moment. There's a mission. No one could dissuade old man Mo's words, so the 2 major generals did not try to dissuade him at all. Now that Mo Heng wanted to bring Sillin to that planet, he would definitely need the approval and permission of some people in the military. Old man Mo would naturally contact the relevant personnel for those matters. They only needed to protect old man Mo. Mo Heng was a man of action. After making the decision, he had Sillin pack up his things and bring along any handy tools. Of course, this handy tool referred to tools related to assembly, not dangerous items such as firearms. After that, Mo Heng took out his communicator and started contacting people. Suali was dumbfounded by the sudden turn of events. He wasn't a member of that circle, and he didn't know what the theoretical 99% comprehensive accuracy meant. He might know a little, but he didn't know what it meant to people like Mo Heng, so he couldn't understand Mo Heng's feelings right now. While Sillin was packing up his tools, he sent a secret signal to Cheto. Cheto's eyes flashed for a moment before he deleted everything that had happened in the workshop just now. He had been paying close attention to the monitor all this time. Although the video had been deleted, the scene of Sillin assembling still existed in Cheto's memory bank. Unless he forcibly deleted it, the memory would always be there. At the same time, Cheto's eyes turned very subtle, and his fingers moved slightly. If Sillin was here, he would have noticed that his fingers were moving at the exact same frequency as when he was assembling just now. The only difference was that Cheto's movements weren't as big. It didn't take long for Mo Heng to finish contacting people. Then he nodded at Sillin and said, "Let's go." Suali was familiar with Mo Heng's personality, so he didn't mind Mo Heng's disregard. He shot Sillin a look and said, "Pay attention. Contact me if you need anything." Sillin nodded and left. C.I. Jincheng was one of the invited members of the League of Stars Research Institute, so he left with them. Huimao and Cheto didn't go with them. Setting aside whether or not the military would allow people like them to enter a planet like this, if they exposed themselves in front of the League of Stars Research Institute's academicians, it would be hard for them to get away. After all, their characteristics were too special. Mo Heng told Sillin about the so-called mission, while he was taking Sillin to the planet. The academicians of the League of Stars Research Institute, who were invited this time, were people who had made contributions and influence in different fields. Right now, they were all conducting research in different places and regions. There were a total of 16 engineers like Mo Heng, and right now they were working on a machine the size of a small mountain. Due to their age, some of the senior academicians who were invited couldn't do everything by themselves. They had to take a break after a while, and during this break they would supervise and guide the work. The people they brought with them were all their favorite students, and they would guide them while they were working on the huge machine. However, Mo Heng didn't bring any students with him when he came to this planet, so he couldn't avoid the criticism of his old enemies. That was why Mo Heng gave Sillin a good scolding when he saw him, and vented his grievances. However, Mo Heng's arrogance when he got off the spaceplane surprised a few of his old colleagues. Sillin was following beside Mo Heng while carrying a toolbox that wasn't fancy at all. His presence was low, and he looked pretty ordinary. He looked like an errand boy. But everyone who knew Emo Hung knew that he wouldn't let an ordinary errand boy follow him. The people who helped Emo Hung with the toolbox were all major generals. Emo Hung slowly walked over with his hands behind his back, and stood with a few old academicians. He looked at the huge machine and nodded. Sillin, go ahead. Sillin's stomach hurt when he heard this. Why did it sound like close the door and let the dogs go? A few old academicians who were resting next to him looked over in surprise. An old man who was also a 4-star academician thumped his leg and shouted, "Old ruffian Mo, who is this guy? You know, we can't let unrelated people in here." Those who could come in were, of course, approved, so they were definitely not unrelated people. The old man said this just to stop Emo Hung, and everyone understood this. Emo Hung didn't put on a straight face like before. Instead, he pretended to be calm and said, "This guy is old and can't move anymore. Let my disciple do it for him." These words surprised the old academicians. It was still the old man who asked first, "Old ruffian Emo, when did you have a disciple?" Emo Hung looked up at the sky. "I've had a disciple for a long time." Hearing old man Mo's proud sigh and trying to pretend to be bitter, Sillin's hand that was holding the box trembled. Look at him. It's as if having a disciple has been through the vicissitudes of life. The old academicians curled their lips and continued to pretend. For Emo Hung, this disciple who appeared in front of these leading academicians for the first time, the old academicians diverted part of their attention. Not only was Emo Hung's disciple mysterious, but he was also too young. So young that they couldn't trust his ability. After Sillin walked over, he didn't do anything immediately. He put down the box and walked around the huge machine, attracting the attention of the old academician's disciples who were busy working. Seeing that his disciple was paying attention to old ruffian Mo's disciple, an old academician's face immediately darkened and he shouted, "Focus on your own work, why are you paying attention to others?" Emo Hung's eyes narrowed. "Sigh, some people are just born to attract attention." The other old academicians who were sitting there resting decided to directly filter out Emo Hung's words, and didn't pay much attention to Sillin. In any case, if he couldn't do anything, it would be a slap in the face for Emo Hung. Reality proved everything. Let's see how long that old ruffian can be smug for. Ignoring what the others thought, Sillin walked around the huge hemispherical machine, and thought for a while with a frown. Hui Mao once said that machines also had their own language, and the information they wanted to express could be understood by listening. This big machine was huge, complicated, and could even block scanners. Without understanding the principle and general structure, no one dared to work on it. So until now, there had been no substantial progress, even with more than a dozen academicians personally working on it. They might be experienced in assembly, but when it came to the language of machines, they couldn't compare to Sillin, so they wouldn't think in that direction. He carefully sensed the subtle movements caused by non-human activities in the surroundings. There weren't even any plants around, so the subtle movements should be caused by this huge machine. After being further stimulated by the chip, Sillin's ability to listen to machine language had improved a lot. As his thoughts slowly settled, he could listen to some intermittent language. Sillin converted these languages into shapes in his mind. And so, in Sillin's mind, the big machine was surrounded by floating shapes from time to time. From the floating and moving trajectories of these shapes, Sillin came to one of the parts of the machine. The spot Sillin was looking for was nearly 10 meters above the ground. Activating his hoverboard, Sillin flew to the spot and pressed down. "Hey kid, don't touch it!" roared an old academician in exasperation. Impatient. Young people are too impatient. Emo Hung didn't care. Being too impatient would only ruin things. He still needed to hone his skills. However, as soon as the old academician finished speaking, the huge, motionless, hemispherical machine split into a few petals like a flower and spread out from the point at the top. Emo Hung slapped his thigh excitedly. "Hey look, it moved!" The old academicians rolled their eyes at the same time. Anyone with eyes would know that it was time to move. However, they had to admit that Emo Hung's mysterious disciple was indeed capable. Whether it was by coincidence or not, he did touch a key spot. This was as exciting as opening a shortcut in a maze. However, looking back at Mo Hung, the old academicians really wanted to remind this arrogant academic ruffian. Mo, watch out for your arrogant tail. Chapter 204. Because of Silen's actions, the project made great progress. This huge hemispherical machine was like a flower bud that took a small step forward. However, this small step was enough for everyone to see the general direction. To be able to become an academician of the League of Stars Research Institute, one's eyesight must be quite good. After the big machine moved, several old academicians quickly formulated the next steps based on the information collected before. The old academicians didn't have the time to stop Silen's actions just now. Although it was a significant step, the project was just too important. They had no choice but to be as cautious as they could be, and they wouldn't allow Silen to do whatever he wanted from now on. Under the guidance of several authoritative figures, each of the direct disciples had the intention of showing off their skills to gain face for their masters, trying their best to show off their most powerful side. The old academicians who were supervising the work nodded at the performance of their disciples. They all thought that their disciples were the best. Every engineering technician had their own assigned tasks. Everyone's assigned area was recorded, and there was a special monitor monitoring it not far away. Every area would be inspected again. If there was a problem, they could directly find the person in charge of that area. Even though the disciples were the ones who did the work, the main responsibility was still on the masters. This was because the masters would personally inspect the work after it was completed. The military wouldn't admit fault because their own equipment didn't detect any problems. They would still look for authoritative figures to take responsibility. This was something that Mo Hung didn't like. As the old academicians were talking, Silen slowly walked over. Mo Hung glanced at him and grinned. He tried to make himself look more serious. It's done. Silen showed an honest smile. It's done. Master, do you want to inspect it? Ahem, of course I have to inspect it. Don't cut corners by finishing it so quickly. If there's a problem, I won't forgive you. Mo Hang's words sounded harsh, but who in the room could not hear the smugness in his voice? As the first person to complete the work and Mo Hang's precious disciple, the old academicians were tired anyway. It was a good time to see what Mo Hang's disciple was capable of. Mo Hang didn't stop them. Instead, he was quite happy. He put his hands behind his back and walked over without Silen's help. The old academicians behind him curled their lips. Look at how cocky he is. When they arrived at the area that Silen was in charge of, the old academicians could tell that it was definitely the work of an extremely professional. It could be said to be perfect. Even the old academicians couldn't guarantee that they could do a better job than the interface of the parts, the connection of the wires, and the placement of the small instruments. In fact, Silen had already finished his work a long time ago. He had even studied the entire machine, but because he had only done the preliminary work, there was a limit to what he could study. After a while, he got bored and stood up to report to Mo Hung. He wondered what the other academicians would think if they knew the truth. He took the military equipment and inspected it. It was indeed of excellent quality. This time, Mo Hang's tail, which had been raised high up in the air, was about to reach the sky. Seeing that the old academicians had been silent all this time, and that he couldn't find any fault to scold, Mo Hung grinned and waved his hands. He pretended to be disgusted and said, all right. Don't think that you'll be fine just because you've completed the project. When we get back, massage this old man's legs and test your recent homework. Recent homework? What the hell is there to do recently? Silen rolled his eyes on the inside, but Silen was well aware of Mo Hang's desire to show off. After Mo Hang lay down on the recliner, he obediently massaged Mo Hang's legs. Aging was first manifested in one's feet and legs. Among people of the same age and gene rank, some would walk as if they were flying, while others would stagger. That was the difference. Moreover, the legs and knee joints had to bear the weight of the entire body. Over time, they would wear out and seriously affect the movement of the joints. As one grew older, the wear and tear would become more and more serious. Even someone like Mo Hung, who was once famous when he was young, had no choice but to accept his old age. His occupational disease was very obvious. His hands were fine when he worked selflessly, but the damage to his legs was more severe. His frequent menstrual cramps had also gradually shrunk. Back at Seven Lights, Silin would massage Emo Heng's legs from time to time. Until now, Emo Heng still felt that the healthcare machine's effect was inferior to Silin's massage. Sigh, my legs feel much more comfortable after every massage. My blood vessels are unblocked, and the soreness and weakness in my legs are greatly reduced. Emo Heng sighed. The few old academicians who had just returned to their seats pretended not to hear anything. Show off all you want. I'll pretend I didn't hear anything. It was only after Silin massaged Mo Heng's legs for a long time that the people on the other side finally finished their work. Because of the importance of this project, many people would rather slow down in order to make every step perfect. But the old academicians had to admit that there was still a gap between their engineering quality and Silin's, even if they did so. In truth, they had already performed very well, and exceeded their usual standards. But with Silin as a comparison, they were not as eye-catching. Although the gap was there, the overall engineering quality of this step was still excellent. Are you ready? Yes. Someone on the other side made a gesture. Alright, start the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Connect. Following the old academician's order, this step of the project began. The energy was connected, and the engineering areas began to come into play. The huge hemispherical shape that opened a little at the top began to change. This big flower bud bloomed into a big arc, and its appearance also changed, revealing some control surfaces that everyone was very familiar with. Everything was difficult at the beginning. The most difficult part had been completed, and the rest of the project would be easier. There was no need for these people to fully invest in it. The things to pay attention to in the early stage, and some of the working principles of this big machine had been annotated, so the people inside the military should be able to handle it after taking over. Originally, someone in the military wanted Emo Heng to participate in the later stages of the project, but Emo Heng refused. This time he did not want to get involved in the internal affairs of the military. If he caused trouble, it would also affect Emo Qing. Emo Heng had a deep understanding of the problem, and was quite decisive. He would immediately cut off what needed to be cut off. After working for half a day, Mo Heng was also tired. Although he wanted to talk to Silin for a while, for the sake of Emo Heng's health, Silin refused and let Emo Heng rest. After being invited to this planet to do the project, Emo Heng had not had a good rest. When he was young, he could work hard, but when he was old, he could not. After Silin repeatedly promised that he wouldn't disappear for no reason this time, Emo Heng finally showed mercy and let Silin leave. In fact, the main reason was that Emo Heng was in a good mood today. He was in a pretty good mood. He was exhilarated and proud of himself. Even when he was sleeping, his mouth was upturned. The person that Emo Heng sent to send Silin back was one of the two major generals. Although this person was still expressionless, at least when he looked at Silin, his eyes were not as cold and alienated as before. They also admired Silin's ability, so it was no wonder that Emo Heng wanted him. A person that could make those old academicians and old authorities speechless was definitely a rare person. Originally, the plan was to send Silin to the small planet Vanguard in the satellite belt, but due to the development of the situation, he was sent to another part of the planet instead. A few hours after Silin was brought out, the military sent out a message saying that they were going to organize a meet and greet. All the invited parties would gather at the stated location. Of course, the people attending the meet and greet were still the leaders of each party. They were allowed to bring a group of people with them, but the number of people and weapons were limited. The B squadrons of Vanguard stayed on the small planet in the satellite belt, but Songba Leruo and Bart had brought Huimao and Cheto with them. Silin could go there directly. Right now, part of the teams dispatched by each party had arrived at the mentioned coordinates on the planet. As for the remaining forces of each party, they naturally had their own arrangements. No one was an idiot, and they were all prepared. They wouldn't trust the military completely, not to mention that there were some people who often clashed with each other among these invited forces. Only when they were prepared would they be able to fight. The meeting point this time was specially circled out by the military for the purpose of a meet and greet. That being said, it would be best if the spaceplane didn't fly into the meeting point. After all, the spaceplane belonged to the military. If Sillin were to walk out of the military spaceplane and return to Vanguard in front of everyone's eyes, there was no telling what kind of trouble they would cause. That was why Sillin got off the spaceplane when he was still some distance away from the meeting point. He activated his hoverboard and flew toward the meeting point. Right now, he didn't know what the leaders were doing. The meeting hadn't started yet, and he didn't see a single big shot in sight. However, the small fries that came along with him were already talking to each other. You could see people wandering around outside everywhere. Sillin's arrival didn't attract any attention. It was too common for people of Sillin's age to wander around everywhere. In this place, most of the hunters were from the 4 great families, but he basically didn't know anyone he met. Sillin flew along the coordinates he obtained, and when he passed by a certain place, he suddenly sensed an unusual movement behind him. He dodged a whip and adjusted his hoverboard. Then he skillfully hooked the hoverboard and stood still. The person who attacked him didn't seem to have any intention of attacking further. There was no killing intent in that attack just now, and it was more like a greeting. That was why Sillin didn't make a move. After he quickly steadied himself, he adjusted his hoverboard and hovered in place. Then he turned around and looked at the person who attacked him behind him. "Yo, it really is you," the person said with joy in his voice. The corner of Sillin's eyebrows rose. A familiar face. "Long time no see, Wuxia." The person who attacked Sillin was none other than the crossdresser, Wuxia he met in Sector S's prison. Sillin had a good impression of Wuxia. At the very least, she didn't run away alone when the passage door closed, and tried to pull Sillin out with a whip instead. This meant that Wuxia was a good person. Right now, Wuxia had changed her attire. She was still dressed as a man, and her mustache was curled at the sides. She stood on the hoverboard and grinned at Sillin. Looking at the area below him, Sillin asked, "You're from Fire Phoenix?" This area was assigned to the people of Sector S as a foothold, and right below it was Fire Phoenix's territory. In Sector S, Fire Phoenix was just like Flying Snake. They were one of the most famous forces in Sector S. Last time Sillin Hulong's route wasn't in Fire Phoenix's territory, but he didn't think that this Wuxia would appear there from so far away. Moreover, he didn't appear as a prisoner or a prison guard. There was no one from Fire Phoenix in that prison. Of course, Sillin wouldn't ask about the secret entanglements between the forces in Sector S. He wouldn't get a true answer even if he did. "Yeah, I'm from Fire Phoenix. It's fate that we meet again, and we're comrades who have gone through thick and thin together. Let me formally introduce myself. My name is Shanhua, and I'm here with Fire Phoenix to join in the fun." A pause later, Shanhua asked, "What's your name? Also, which force are you from? From the looks of it, you don't look like you'll be staying at the forces in Sector S." "My name is Sillin, I'm from Vanguard." Sillin didn't plan to hide this. "Oh, one of the Great Four, Vanguard? You're pretty famous. I didn't think you'd have such a big background. I heard that the people of the Great Four who can come here are all important people in the Great Four. I'm not really an important person. It's pure coincidence that I'm here." Shanhua didn't believe Sillin's words, but she didn't plan to dwell on this question any longer. Instead, she asked, "Sai, I'm bored right now. Do you have any fun recommendations?" "No, I'm about to report back. I don't have time. Tisk, boring." While they were talking, another person flew over from below. However, this person didn't come from Fire Phoenix's territory, but from Flying Snake's territory. "A Flying Snake?" Shanhua said curiously. Based on her understanding of Flying Snake CGU, this guy usually didn't pay attention to outsiders. "Sillin, long time no see," CGU said with a smile. CGU saw Sillin and Shanhua in the air when he was bored and looked around with his binoculars just now. His main reason for flying over was still Sillin. He didn't have a good chat with him last time at Sector S because there were too many things to do, and he was busy for a long time after that. He didn't have the chance to pay attention to Sillin Hulong's movements, and by the time he was free, these two people were nowhere to be seen. It was rare for him to meet someone he knew here, So of course he had to come over and say hello. Long time no see, CGU. Sillin smiled and fist bumped the flying CGU. You know each other? Shanho looked at the duo and saw the smile on CGU's face. Their relationship wasn't bad, at least better than her relationship with Sillin. They were familiar with each other. Since when did Flying Snake and Vanguard contact each other? We met each other by chance when we went to Sector S last time. Sillin said. He didn't mention anything about CGU being rescued from danger. CGU and Sillin were grateful for Sillin's explanation. After all, no one was willing to announce those things to the public, let alone a fellow big-head Phoenix Flame of Sector S. CGU looked around and asked, "Why don't I see Lung? Is he here too?" "He should be, but not in this area. I'm from Vanguard and he's on the other side. Why don't you give me your communicator's contact number, and I'll tell you when I get in touch with him." The military had set up a special local communication network in this assembly area, and there was a special frequency coverage in the assembly area. Sure. Leaving aside the fact that Sillin Helong had saved Sijia's life, befriending Sillin Helong would be beneficial to Sijia's own development. Sijiu believed in his own judgment. Shanhua also came over to exchange contact numbers. She was pretty bored here, and she heard that she would be staying here for a few more days. The meeting wouldn't end in a day. Many of his old friends hadn't come, and Shanhua was a person who couldn't stay idle. It wasn't easy for her to meet someone she knew, someone she could call an acquaintance. Adding Flying Snake, yes, and that Lung they mentioned, it shouldn't be too boring. After exchanging contact numbers, Sillin continued to fly towards Vanguard. After Sillin flew away, Shanhua followed CGU with interest. "Hey, how did you two meet? Do you want me to exchange information with you?" CGU glanced at her. "You didn't tell him that you're the disciple of the current Fire Phoenix?" "I didn't." Shanhua raised her thumb and stroked her mustache. Many people would have thoughts about her identity as the disciple of the current Fire Phoenix. It was precisely because of this that Shanhua often put on makeup and left home to roam the world. Fire Phoenix also let Shanhua's behavior be. This was also a form of growth, and it wasn't good to keep her by her side. "Is there a need?" Shanhua looked at CGU. CGU didn't reply. When Sillin arrived at Vanguard's area, he could already see the cat sitting on Songba Leruo's hat from afar. Right now, Huimao was scratching his paw impatiently while Bart was teasing him with his long mustache. At first, Huimao just shook his ears and ignored Bart's teasing, but in the face of Bart's persistent harassment, Huimao finally moved his paw. While Huimao was feeling depressed because the B squadrons couldn't come to the meeting point, Bart and Songba Leruo expressed their willingness to bring Huimao and Cheto to the meeting point. Huimao thought for a moment and decided to tag along. With Bart and Songba Leruo's guarantee, Huimao wasn't afraid of the military or the monstrous scientists attacking him. But when he arrived, he discovered that he didn't even know them. Just as Huimao was about to shave the old bastard's mustache with his sharp claws, he suddenly sensed something and looked up into the sky. When he saw Sillin, Huimao wanted to shout, "My savior!" He jumped down from Songba Leruo's hat and climbed up Sillin's leg before Sillin could stabilize the hoverboard. Then he crouched on Sillin's shoulder and shot Barta. "What can you do now, look?" Bart simply stroked his mustache and smiled faintly without saying a word. Sillin jumped down from the hoverboard and put it away. Then he flicked Huimao's head and looked at Bart and Songba Leruo to greet them. "Lil Sillin, are you done over there?" Bart asked. "It's done. The rest will be taken over by the people inside the military." Bart nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Since Bart and Songba Leruo had been moving all this time, they had already reached the edge of Vanguard's zone. Any further, and they would be entering Lon Huti's zone. While Sillin and Bart were talking about this newly lit sector, Huimao suddenly let out a shout and pointed his claw in a certain direction. "Sillin, look. It's that kid called Ghost Butterfly something who owes us money." Chapter 205. Huimao had never had any direct contact with Guidai Shichi before. Danlong had once told Huimao about Lon Huti, and under Huimao's strong request, he had even used a device to draw out Guidai Shichi's appearance. After serving under Silin for so long, Huimao had developed a temperament that would get excited at the mention of money. He had a deep impression of the people who owed him money, so when he saw the person on the debt list, Huimao became excited. Because Huimao was too excited, his voice was a little loud, so much so that the people around him turned to look at him. Then they looked in the direction Huimao's claw was pointing at. Guidai Shichi was originally chatting with his two companions about the few big-breasted girls they had met on their way here, but Huimao's loud shout attracted their attention. Then Guidai Shichi's stomach ached when he saw the person he really didn't want to see. Why is that bastard here? Moreover, because of Huimao's words, everyone's gazes were focused on them. Guidai Shichi just wanted to find a hole to hide in. Bart looked at the constipated expression on Guidai Shichi's face and smiled in relief. Even Lan Hudi's people had times when they were humiliated like this. Long time no see. Silin raised his hand in greeting. The corner of Guidai Shichi's mouth twitched. Long time no see. The people around Guidai Shichi looked at Silin and wondered what level this person belonged to in Vanguard. Judging by age, he was either a B Squadron member or an assistant in the A Squadron. But when they looked at the two people next to him, whether it was Bart or Songba Leruo, they were both veterans. Who wouldn't know them? The person standing next to the two of them was not unfamiliar with them either. He didn't lower his stance either, so there was more to think about. Huimao stood on Silin's shoulder and stared at Guidai Shichi with round eyes, as if saying, if you don't admit it, I'll go up and scratch you. Ha ha ha, so you guys are from Vanguard. I was looking for you guys for a long time, but I couldn't find you. Do you have any contact information? Guidai Shichi took the initiative to walk over and said. It couldn't be helped. If he waited for Silin to take the initiative to speak, would he, Guidai Shichi, still have any face left? Moreover, Guidai Shichi had personally experienced that brat's character. He was definitely trash. Silin and Huimao weren't stupid enough to believe Guidai Shichi's bullshit. They just smiled at Guidai Shichi, making Guidai Shichi's hair stand on end. Bart patted Silin's shoulder and said, Hee, you guys go ahead and chat. Songba Leruo and I will go somewhere else to meet our old friends. After Bart and Songba Leruo left, Guidai Shichi was visibly more relaxed. After all, the two of them were from the older generation. It was a little awkward to speak in front of them. Moreover, Guidai Shichi was used to being casual in Lan Hudi, so he felt uncomfortable when he saw the older members of other hunter regiments. Brat, the normal stimulant elixirs and nutrition pills cost a total of 1 million, and that's not including the interest. Huimao said. Guidai Shichi glanced at Huimao. How did this pet know about his debt? Without thinking too much about it, Guidai Shichi put his hands in his trouser pockets and raised his chin. Why would Lan Hudi do something so immoral? Find a place to swipe my card, and I'll transfer the money to you. Silin's communicator rang, just as he was about to speak. The corner of Silin's eyes twitched when he saw the contact code displayed on the communicator. A888888. Setting aside the question of which party the A represented, Silin knew that it was that idiot just from the 6 8s behind the contact code. Silin looked around and found a quiet place. As expected, Lung's face that had just woken up appeared on the communicator the moment the call connected. I was just about to look for you. But how did you know my contact code? Silin asked. Lung smiled proudly and scratched his hair that looked like a bird's nest. I got it from C.I. Jincheng. Hey, Wheeze, I have a new flavor of fish biscuits here. There are more than 10 flavors, including freshwater and saltwater fish flavors. Really? Huimao's dilated pupils showed his excitement. Here, look. Lung lifted up a plate in his hands. The biscuits on the plate were specially made into the shape of fish. Different flavors had different fish shapes. Silin, let's go look for Lung. It's none of our business as long as they don't fight here. Huimao slapped Silin's face with his claws and said. You guys can come over now. I have a newly built clubhouse here, and I'm planning to hold a small gathering while everyone is free. We're all familiar with each other, and I've already told C.I. Jincheng and Knight about it. You should come as well. There are a few other familiar faces who will be coming later. Let's have a gathering. All right. Oh right, did CGU ask you to invite him? Flying Snake? He's here too? Of course I'm inviting him. Who else is there too? Who's that figure behind you? Do I know him? Lung asked when he saw the figure behind Sillin through the communicator. Sillin adjusted the angle of the communicator so that Lung could see Guidai Shichi more clearly. When he saw the face on the communicator, Guidai Shichi's mood turned sour again. This guy wasn't a good guy either. However, just as Guidai Shichi braced himself for Lung's next words that made his stomach ache just like the cat on Sillin's shoulder, Lung took a close look at Guidai Shichi and said with certainty, I don't know him. Guidai Shichi. This sentence didn't just make his stomach ache, even his balls hurt. Guidai Shichi never knew that his presence was this insignificant. Huemao's beard shook. How can you not know him? He's the one who was beaten half to death. The one who owed you money and was saved by you guys later. You even told me what he looked like back then. Guidai Shichi wanted to kill someone when he heard Huemao's words. Fortunately, there weren't many people here, and their voices weren't loud, otherwise they would be laughed at for a long time if they were overheard. After looking again, Lung finally remembered that he didn't usually have a good memory for people who didn't trade money with him. So it's that perverted butterfly. Since we've bumped into each other, let's come over together. Alright, I'm not going to talk to you guys anymore. I'm hungry, I'm going to look for food, see you later, beep. Before Sillin could finish, the guy cut him off. Putting away the communicator, Sillin looked at Guidai Shichi. Let's go, we'll go to that rich guy. He has everything and we can even get some food. Guidai Shichi was quite unwilling to go, he really didn't dare compliment the characters of these two people. But a rich guy? Who is he? Guidai Shichi asked. Sillin looked at Guidai Shichi in surprise. You don't know who he is? That guy's appearance rate in the media is quite high. Guidai Shichi was conflicted. He had been busy and didn't have time to pay attention to that, and after a simple check on Sillin, he didn't check again. He was really busy at that time. Seeing Guidai Shichi's conflicted look, Sillin said, his name is Andrira Lung. Fuck. It turned out to be that poor family that only had money left. No matter what, he had to go get some food. Let's go, Guidai Shichi said angrily. Wait, I'll call someone else. Sillin contacted Cijiu, but Pianhua kept an eye on Cijiu. So when Cijiu made a move, she followed. They arranged to meet at the border between Vanguard and Lanhuti. After all, Cijiu and the others weren't part of the hunter group, so they couldn't enter any of the areas. So they could only meet at the border. When they arrived at the place that Lung mentioned, they all had the same lament. What a wastrel! The place where Lung and the Andrira family were located was surrounded by the more famous families and business groups in the League of Stars, so this area was the kind that blinded the eyes, but the Andrira family was especially eye-catching. The temporary entertainment area that Lung mentioned was comparable to a high-class hotel. There were servants waiting in front of the door, but other than these servants, there was also a familiar skinny figure walking out from inside, obviously coming for Sillin. The person who came was Brzett. There were a few youngsters talking in the private room above, and Lung felt that it wasn't good for them to talk freely with Brzett around. So he kicked Brzett out and told him to wait for Sillin at the door. Brzett brought Sillin and the others to the floor where Lung and the others were. The little old man's every movement was still very gentlemanly, and he also had a very kind smile on his face, but Cijiu and Guidai Shichi were all tensed up. They could feel that this little old man was very strong, and not someone they could deal with. Even if Brzett didn't show any evil intentions, Cijiu and Guidai Shichi just couldn't let their guard down. This was a habit that had been cultivated for a long time. Suddenly coming to a new environment and seeing strangers, who would let down their guard so easily. Brzett didn't mind, and was still as kind as if he was looking at a descendant of his own bloodline. Brzett brought Sillin and the others to a door and politely made an inviting gesture with his hand. The young master is inside. Sigh, it's better for an old man like me to not attend a gathering of youngsters. I'll only be despised if I do. Seriously, every generation of Andrira's successors had the same bad temper. Right now, he was already looking forward to the next direct descendant of Andrira, or Lung's descendant. It was much more interesting to be led by a little kid. Thank you. Sillin returned a salute. He was still rather respectful towards the little old man Brzett. When he pushed open the door, a few people were already seated around the prepared chairs inside. Most of them were familiar faces, but there were two he didn't know. Lung Knight, Ci Jincheng, Pride, Teresa, and Yu Linglong, who was sitting in a special wheelchair. When he saw Sillin come in, Lung stood up and waved. "Hurry up, Sillin, I've been waiting for you for a long time." "Hey, Flying Snake, I didn't expect someone from Sector S to come as well. Please take a seat, everyone." It could be said that the people sitting here right now were all reputable figures of their generation. They were all people who held real power in their respective forces, so even if they usually carried an air of arrogance around them, they had to put it away for now. Pride had matured quite a bit after so many years. Although his eyes still carried a habitual air of arrogance, it was already a lot better than before. Originally, Pride was busy with other missions and couldn't come to Sector Z. But after Ji Feihong told him about Sillin's situation, and after he confirmed it with Knight, he set aside his mission and came here. Humph. Pride still gave that trademark snort, but there was no hint of contempt in it. Sillin didn't mind. After getting familiar with him, he knew that this kid was actually just this awkward. When he was embarrassed, when he didn't know what to say, he would just give a humph. Everyone knew it, but they didn't point it out. Yu Linglong returned a sweet smile to Sillin. She was still about the same as the little girl he remembered from back then. No one sat on the seat next to Yu Linglong, and no one dared to. Everyone knew who the seat belonged to. Sijiu and Guidai Shichi very perceptively snatched the two seats next to Yu Linglong. Pai Hua swept his gaze across the group once before sitting next to Sijiu. He didn't squeeze into the seat next to Yu Linglong, and just stared at them curiously. Sillin sat down next to Yu Linglong, and looked at her feet. Her feet were wrapped in rehabilitation equipment that was obviously the same as Dias's after undergoing the differentiation therapy. "What happened?" Sillin asked. "It was an accident. It broke." Yu Linglong answered in a low voice. Her tone was obviously filled with great grievance. Lung Knight and the rest immediately shuddered. "Little Princess Yu, where's that overbearing aura you had 2 minutes ago?" Sillin sighed on the inside. After learning of Yu Linglong's identity, he also understood that everything that happened around her was not simple. There was obviously a very complicated reason why her feet were broken. Since Yu Linglong didn't want to talk about it, he didn't ask anymore. "How are you recovering now?" "It's all right. I can barely walk, but I can't run. It hurts a lot." She was still feeling wronged. Lung, Knight and the rest turned their heads sideways and looked at the ground, pretending to know nothing. "Little Princess Yu, you're lying. I saw you kicking an apple falling from a tree to pieces just 2 days ago. Why didn't you say it hurt then?" Teresa, who had been watching all this time, pursed her lips and smiled. She raised the wine glass in her hand and gestured. "Long time no see, Sillin." Teresa looked about the same as before. Time had not affected the beauty of Seven Light's famous beauty Sa. But Sillin knew that Teresa was no longer the Gallo Teresa of the past. Teresa Duance, Aflon Duance's eldest daughter. This was Teresa's true identity. Back then, Sillin had already discovered the genetic relationship between Teresa and Aflon. "Long time no see, beauty Sa is still the same. But you've changed. You're not as handsome as before." Teresa teased. "Ahem." Under Yu Linglong's coercion, Lung snapped his fingers, and a big plate of fish biscuits was served. "Wow." Huimao jumped onto the big plate and rolled around, smearing all the fish biscuits with his scent. "How do you feel about this present?" Lung picked up a fish biscuit and tossed it towards Huimao. Huimao caught it with his mouth, chewed twice and swallowed it. "It tastes pretty good. I'm going to pack it up and bring it back later." "Sure, I'll have someone deliver it to you." Wheeze moved the plate of fish biscuits to the side and ate happily on its own. It ignored Sillin and Wheeze completely. The group of people gathered together, and as the host, Lung gave everyone a formal introduction. He only introduced them by name and a few simple things. Today's dinner did not involve any secrets, and it was just a gathering of peers. Among the people Sillin did not recognize, there were 2 people who were similar to Alan Shev back in the day. However, according to Lung's introduction, The electronic publications behind them were much higher ranked than the Allen families. Both of them had more than 80 contribution points. Phineas was backed by a famous internet information magnate with more than 80 contribution points in the League of Stars. Back when Sillin was still at 7 Lights, he had once reported on the sector championships Limitless. He was somewhat related to Lung. Funyuzwa was also backed by a famous business-related media magnate with more than 80 contribution points in the League of Stars, Lux. Since he mainly reported on the business sector, he had a lot of contact with Lung. If the two media giants Limitless and Lux could reach their current level, then the children they taught wouldn't be bad. At the very least, they wouldn't be muddle-headed when it came to judging and handling people. Therefore, even though they were facing people like Sillin who weren't exactly famous in the upper circle, the two of them would not look down on them. Plus Lung, Knight, Ci Jincheng, Yu Linglong and many more people valued them. Why should they look down on them? If they didn't even have this little bit of foresight, then what the hell were they supposed to do? The two young masters of the media giants were also very interested in the trio who came with Sillin. Pianhua saw that everyone had stated their background, and after a moment of thought, he revealed his identity as Fire Phoenix's disciple. Flying Snake had no intention of hiding his identity either. Phineas and Funyuzwa were obviously more curious about Sector S. After all, the League of Stars' media had the least involvement other than Sector Z. Now that Sector Z was half open to the public, only Sector S was left. After that, the four of them had a very congenial conversation. Lung had said that today was just a small gathering. They would not talk about business, and only talk about entertainment. Without the interference of their elders, everyone was chatting happily. They talked and laughed at each other's embarrassing moments. At the very least, the atmosphere was pretty good. No one bothered to find out how many complicated things you had behind you, or how many shameful criminal records you had. In reality, everyone would probably find out who had a criminal record not long after this gathering. They might not be able to investigate detailed secrets with their abilities, but they definitely had the ability to gather some general information and rumors. After all, this was a large military area, so they didn't dare to play too wildly. They just ate, drank, and laughed to relax everyone. At the same time, they also felt at ease. This could be considered a group. After all, it was far too easy for a lone force to become cannon fodder in this chaotic situation. No matter how high you stood, there was always a chance that you would fall. Also, judging from the current situation, if you fell, you wouldn't be able to climb the mountain again. Everyone had eaten their fill during the meal, and the worries in their hearts had eased a little. They drank a little too much, so Lung sent people to send them back. Pianhua was having a great drinking contest with a group of men, and she had even knocked out the two young masters of the media giants. They had even started calling each other bro and bro. Sillin didn't know if Phineas and Funyuzwa had seen through Pianhua's disguise, but it sounded like they were calling each other bro pretty smoothly. Pianhua herself was a little drunk. Luckily, they were the only ones who knew that Pianhua was a woman. If everyone else knew, then they would have lost a lot of face. CGU had already predicted Fire Phoenix's fury, so it was best to avoid Pianhua for the next few days. Yu Linglong sat on her wheelchair with her head slightly bowed. She did not ask anyone to pick her up, and instead said to Sillin, "Send me off." Okay. Sillin did not plan to ask Lung to send someone off just now. Since he had decided to send Yu Linglong off, then he asked Lung to send Huimao back. This guy had to supervise the fish biscuits anyway. They didn't use a flying car. Yu Linglong's area wasn't too far from here, and she didn't want to take a flying car, so she asked Sillin to push her around. Night had already fallen in this area, and at the same time, the temperature difference between day and night was relatively large. Unlike the terrain of the hunter group, the natural scenery here was much better. After walking a few steps, they could see a small stream. Sillin could feel the vitality of the stream. Under the rocky ground, there were living creatures swimming back and forth in the stream. Not far away, there was a stone bridge that looked very ancient, but Yu Linglong suggested walking over it. The stream wasn't deep, not even reaching their knees, so they didn't have to worry about drowning. Your foot is still in the treatment period, so you can't touch the stream, Sillin said. "It's fine, the treatment device on my foot is waterproof." Saying that, Yulinglong stood up and pressed a button on her wheelchair. The original wheelchair automatically folded up and floated 1 meter away from Yulinglong. She was a little stiff from sitting for too long today, so she stood up and held onto Silin's arm as they slowly walked forward. The area of the rich was very particular. Although the security system here was very good, it still maintained the natural appearance to a large extent, and there were even some sounds of insects. The two didn't say anything, and when they reached the edge of the water, Silin stopped. He slowly knelt down and pulled Yulinglong's skirt that was almost hanging to the ground up to her knees and tied a knot. This way, the skirt wouldn't touch the water, and it could also protect her knees. Silin helped Yulinglong sit on it, and used his sleeve to wipe the water off her legs. He loosened the knotted skirt to cover her legs, and adjusted the thermal insulation on the wheelchair. Silin pushed the wheelchair towards the place Yulinglong mentioned. When they approached the area, there was a group of people waiting there, but none of them came forward. Obviously, they knew little princess used temperament very well. Silin pushed the wheelchair all the way to that side, and handed it to the person who took over. However, Yulinglong turned the wheelchair around, and looked at Silin quietly. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were obviously waiting for something. Silin sighed and said, "Give me your hand." Yulinglong's eyes curved into 2 crescent moons, and she quickly extended her hand. Silin placed a large green pearl on Yulinglong's hand. Under the twilight, it emitted a gentle green light, and it made people feel that it was full of vitality. Yulinglong could feel the warmth emitted from the green pearl, and the vitality transmitted to her palm. Even her breathing became much smoother. Of course, she knew that this thing was very precious. At least, with her status as the little princess of the Yu family, she had never seen such a special pearl until now. "This is for you, it's good for your body's recovery." "Thank you," Yulinglong said, holding the green pearl in her hand happily. "I should be the one saying thank you." Silin didn't know what Yulinglong saw in him, but during the days when Silin was in the 6th division, Yulinglong had helped him a lot, both openly and secretly, some of which Silin didn't even know. Looking at Yulinglong's childlike expression, Silin stretched out his hand and rubbed Yulinglong's head like how he rubbed Tang Qiuqiu. The group of people behind Yulinglong were so shocked that their jaws dropped. Their dog eyes were really blind. He actually rubbed the little princess's head. The worst thing was that the little princess actually had a shy expression. "Go back and rest early." "Okay." After saying goodbye, Silin walked back, but he didn't use his hoverboard to fly away. This area was currently forbidden for outsiders to fly in the air, and the moment he flew up, he would probably become a sieve for the guards and robots of the various families hidden in the dark. After walking until he couldn't see the people of the Yu family, Silin raised his head to look at the sky, and then gave a middle finger. Somewhere high up in the sky, a small round ball was floating there. On the other side of the small round ball was a room in Lung's leisure house. Lung, Knight, and Ci Jincheng were huddled there staring at the screen. When they saw the big middle finger on the screen, the 3 colleagues shouted, "Fuck! How did this guy find out?" Lung was conflicted. "Perverted senses," Knight said. Ci Jincheng didn't say anything. He was wondering where on earth the problem was. This surveillance device was floating high up in the sky where it was hard to see with the naked eye, and it was nighttime right now. How on earth did Silin discover it? Silin didn't know about the 3 fellows' conflict, but he knew that they wouldn't stay put the moment he pushed Yulinglong out. Lung's side wasn't the only one monitoring him. However, the other parties weren't doing too well, and they were constantly being disrupted by unknown signals. It was Cheto's doing. Silin arrived at the border of several forces. It was the neutral zone, and a lot of people were flying along it. Even though it was very late right now, there were still a lot of hoverboards, flying cars, and so on. Silin shot a glance in the direction of the little stream. He passed by with Yulinglong on his back. Then he activated his hoverboard, jumped onto it, and flew towards the vanguard's area. Some time after Silin's departure, the number of people in this area gradually decreased. There was only one person flying in the neutral zone, every 10 or so minutes. After a flying car whizzed past, everything became quiet again. The only sound one could hear was the chirping of insects. Meanwhile, a human figure gradually rose from the surface of the little stream Silin, and Yulinglong passed by. Its face couldn't be seen clearly, and it looked like it was made entirely out of water. The figure stopped rising after its torso was exposed. The water person looked at the neutral zone and said, "Did that little guy discover me?" "I think so." The voice that answered the water person came from the forest not far away, but there was no one in sight. A gust of wind blew past, and a leaf drifted down. However, it was blocked by an invisible object on its way down, and it made a turn before landing somewhere else. "Forget it, who cares? Our target can't be him anyway," the water person said. "Why can't it be him? Don't underestimate that brat. On the contrary, that brat has the item." "Really? That brat doesn't seem to be very powerful." "He's still a little lacking in power, but he was able to discover your existence, so he must have hidden himself quite well. Let's not touch him for now and observe the situation first." "All right." The water person dove back into the water, and everything returned to normal. The flying cars that occasionally passed by the neutral zone had no idea that there were two people here. By the time Silin returned to the Vanguard's territory, it was already quite late. Apart from the people on shift duty, most of the others were already resting, so Silin walked into his room without alerting anyone. As soon as he entered the room, he was greeted by the smell of fish. There was a big box full of fish biscuits in the room. Judging from the situation, Huemao's storage cabinet couldn't fit all the fish biscuits in there. Among the fish biscuits, there was a cat with the tip of its ears sticking out. It moved a little when Silin walked in, but nothing else happened after that. Silin shook his head and let the cat go for now. Standing at the corner, Cheto opened his eyes and closed them again when he saw that Silin had no intention of talking to him. After washing up, Silin lay down on the bed and thought about what happened today. The gathering at Sloane's place was a small matter. The first thing that puzzled him was Yulinglong's injuries. When he was carrying Yulinglong on his back, he clearly noticed that there was something wrong with her breathing system and heartbeat. Yulinglong's emotions were part of the reason, but the main reason was that her internal organs had been seriously injured. Her breathing looked normal at first glance, but Yulinglong's internal organs were seriously damaged. Who could have hurt her like that when she was under the protection of so many people in the Yu family? Her internal organs were seriously damaged, and her legs were broken. It wasn't hard to imagine that Yulinglong had a brush with death. Silin could see that Yulinglong's injury was related to the Yu family, but the second thing that puzzled Silin wasn't as simple as it seemed. When Silin walked into the stream, he sensed something unusual in the water, but he didn't sense any danger. Moreover, there were a lot of Yu family guards hiding in the dark at the time, and they would have come out at the first sign of trouble. That was why Silin pretended not to notice anything and walked across the stream with Yulinglong on his back. But when he came back, he noticed an unusual presence in the forest even though he was walking on the stone bridge. The other party hid themselves very well, and Silin wouldn't have noticed them if he hadn't met them before. The man who once appeared in the prison, Azrael's men, had arrived here without anyone knowing. So, what was their purpose this time? At the very least, Silin hadn't sensed any large-scale strange phenomenon until now. But did the military know about the arrival of Azrael? No matter what, Silin had to be vigilant. Azrael's men were all crazy, and no one knew what they were thinking. Early the next morning, Carrie and the others who knew that Silin would return late came to look for Silin, and wanted this vice-captain to tell them about his romantic encounter. To reach Silin's room, they had to pass through a hall in the middle of this floor, but Carrie swallowed his clamor the moment he arrived at the hall. Nah. Senior Nada. Nada sat on the sofa in the hall, reading a paper book in his hand, and beside him was a box. Towards Carrie and the others' clamor, he just smiled and said, "You're in good spirits." Carrie, Xiaoshang, and the others scratched their heads with a smile, not knowing how to react. Nada was definitely here to look for Silin. Carrie and the others stood there awkwardly for a while before leaving. Facing such a senior, it was really nerve-wracking. Not everyone could be as calm as Sillin. When Sillin woke up, Nada had already flipped more than 10 pages of the book. I'm really sorry, Senior Nada. Why didn't you ask them to wake me up? It's okay, you're tired too. Sillin walked over and took out a bottle of water and some jerky from the storage cabinet. When he passed it to Nada, Nada waved his hand. You can eat, I've already eaten. Sillin didn't hesitate and started eating in front of Nada. What brings you here? Sillin asked while chewing on the jerky. The rule of not talking when eating or sleeping didn't apply to hunters. Hunters didn't have time to follow those time-wasting etiquette. Nada closed the book and pushed the box in front of Sillin. These are some parasite samples collected by some of my friends over the years. You can take a look if you're interested. Sillin clapped his hands, wiped his fingers clean and carefully opened the box. There were some sealed samples in the box. The bigger parasites only had some images and the samples were only a part of their body. As for the smaller parasites, there were whole ones in half of them. They had different shapes, some were ferocious, some were normal. There are some related records of these parasites in the video. It's definitely not as good as the professional records. It's just a rough record. Just make do with it. Sillin closed the box and smiled. This is enough. They're very precious samples. Nada nodded. Some of them are very special. There are also some that I couldn't get samples of, only some images. I took a look and there are a few that are really rare. If I have the chance, I might as well catch one. Sillin didn't look at the images. After finishing his breakfast, he brought the box to his room and put it away. Do you have any plans for the morning? If you don't have any plans, accompany this old man for a walk. Nada said. I don't have any plans. Please wait a moment. Sillin changed his clothes and brought some essentials with him. Then he walked out with Nada. I heard that you went to Andryra's boy yesterday? And Lon Hudy's men? Sillin didn't deny it. Many people knew about this. It's a good thing. Whether it's Andryra's, Lon Hudy's or the people of Sector S, it's a good thing to get to know them. I know that you have a wide network of contacts, and these are all good for your future development. It may not be beneficial to use the old standards, but given the current situation, I believe you can analyze it even if you don't know much. Right now it's not as stable as it used to be. Although Sillin didn't agree with some of Nada's views, Nada was teaching him sincerely. Sillin just listened attentively. Nada continued. Yesterday, a few old fellows in the A squadron had a small meeting. Although the leaders' meeting hadn't started yet, everyone had analyzed some things according to the information we received. Other than the military's absolute control of Sector Z, the rest of the places will be divided. The military doesn't have a stomach big enough to swallow up this big sector in one go. Hunter groups and the like will have at least 10 years of occupation rights. As for the development and collection of resources on each planet, whether or not they can take over the areas they have been allocated will depend on their own abilities. Will there be a lot of competition? Sillin asked. Competition, that's for sure. I'm guessing that the leaders will draw randomly when the time comes, and those who get more resources will naturally be eyed by those with less resources. Therefore, your B Squadron's free missions will be cancelled. When the time comes, you'll have to stay in your assigned area for a longer period of time and deal with the traps in the dark. You must be prepared for all of this. I know. This was the benefit of being a big force. Once there was a cake, the big forces in the League of Stars would divide it up cleanly. The small forces couldn't even eat the dregs. While Nada was explaining some things to pay attention to, his intention was to let Sillin be mentally prepared. He didn't tell these things directly to Shotten, but to Sillin instead. It was obvious how much Nada valued Sillin. In Nada's eyes, Sillin was far more important than Shotten. Both his strength and connections satisfied Nada very much. As the duo walked, they approached the neutral zone. There was a flying car waiting for Nada. Never mind, we'll stop here. I still have some matters to attend to. You go do your own thing. After watching Nada enter the flying car and leave, Sillin also turned around and prepared to go back. It was at this moment a few people on hoverboards flew over and laughed loudly. Hearing the laughter, Sillin turned around abruptly. There were only a few backs left in the air. They looked very ordinary, just like the young people he saw when he first came to this area. The laughter of the people on the hoverboards disappeared in an instant, but it triggered a memory buried deep in Silen's mind. It was one of the two voices that had been troubling him all this time. Fog, or Wuxia? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.